Oh, there it is. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, June 11th, 2019. This is a Prescott City Council voting session. Mayor Pro Tem, do you have any announcements?
I do. I would just like to share that we had the premiere for a Wishman movie on Friday. It is amazing. It's a great story about a Prescottonian, Frank Shankwitz, and I encourage all of you to go to Harkins Theater and take in this movie. And it was superb. So please help support Kitty and Frank Shankwitz and go see Wishman.
All filmed in and around Prescott, Arizona.
It's amazing to see, and you'll even recognize some of the extras, like Stan Goligoski. Right?
All right. Thanks for that announcement. Today we have an invocation by Senior Pastor Dan Hurlbert with Prescott United Methodist Church, and then the pledge will be led by Councilman Good.
Let us pray. Oh God, we give you thanks for this beautiful day. We thank you for our beautiful home here, for the wonders of nature that are all around us. We thank you for our first responders in this community, for our servicemen and women, especially those in harm's way. We pray for peace. And we give you thanks, oh God, for those whom you have called to service in this meeting. We ask that you would be with them and guide their actions. Amen.
Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in pledging allegiance to the flag of the United States, the greatest nation on earth.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome.
Thank you, Pastor. Let's please call roll.
Mayor Mangarelli,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Orr,
Here.
Councilman Blair,
Yes, ma'am.
Councilman Good,
Here.
Councilman Lamerson,
Here.
Councilwoman Scholl,
Here.
Councilman Sischka.
Here.
All are present.
Thank you. Proclamations.
The first one is Yavapai College promise for tuition-free degree for class of 2019.
Is there anyone from Yavapai College who'd like to come up and accept? Okay. Proclamation Yavapai Promise. Whereas people with an associate's degree on average earn $360,000 more during their career than people with a high school diploma. And whereas people with associate's degrees contribute an average of $100,000 more to the tax rolls than people with high school diplomas. And whereas a well-educated workforce helps attract and retain businesses because 64% of jobs require a college certificate or degree. And whereas people with a college degree are less likely to take advantage of various tax-funded services, and whereas more than 200 other communities have already established College Promise scholarship programs, infusing millions of dollars of federal grants into their communities. And whereas the Yavapai Promise program is a promise to make earning a college degree tuition-free for the graduating high school and GED class of 2019 who complete a degree within 2 years or 7 consecutive semesters at Yavapai College. And whereas the City of Prescott desires to create a college-going culture within Yavapai County. Now therefore, Greg L. Mangarelli, Mayor of the City of Prescott, Arizona, does hereby proclaim that the City of Prescott supports the Yavapai Promise program of Yavapai College. Thank you.
Okay, next proclamation.
Ernest A. Love Post-6 Centennial Anniversary.
Come on up.
Are you dyeing your eyebrows?
Right. It's really great. Well, it's a particular pride for me to present this proclamation. I'm entering my 29th year as a member of the American Legion, and it's pretty incredible to think that this particular post has been in existence for 100 years. So this proclamation is for recognizing Ernest A. Love Post-6 Centennial Day, whereas 20 Yavapai County veterans of the Great War gathered in Prescott, Arizona, the evening of June 25th, 1919, and formed Ernest A. Love Post of the American Legion. And whereas Fred Blair Townsend, temporary secretary of the American Legion, Department of Arizona, presented the charter to Ernest A. Love Post 2 of the American Legion that evening, and that post then became Ernest A. Love Post 6 of the American Legion, Department of Arizona. And whereas the American Legion was founded on the 4 pillars of care for veterans: a strong national defense, Americanism and children and youth, and since its inception, the American Legion has played a leading role in initiatives and breakthroughs that have affected the lives of Americans in every community. And whereas since its inception in 1919, the Ernest A. Love Post 6 in Prescott has fulfilled the Legion's mission through programs such as Boy State, Boy Scouts of America, and school awards for scholarship and citizenship. Whereas on June 25, 2019, Ernest A. Love Post 6 of the American Legion will celebrate its 100th birthday, and now therefore Greg L. Mengarelli, Mayor of the City of Prescott, does hereby proclaim June 25, 2019 as Ernest A. Love Post 6 Centennial Day. Please acknowledge our Legionnaires.
Just a couple of words. This is our 100th anniversary. It's the 100th anniversary of the American Legion and the 100th anniversary of the Post in Prescott, Arizona. The 25th, we will be having our birthday party, and everyone is invited. We're right up the way here, 202 South Pleasant Street. And look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Is opposed to getting rid of an old tarnished American flag? Box up front. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Good to see you.
See ya. Yeah, you bet.
See you.
All right. Thank you for that. Let's move on to consent agenda. Is there any member that would like to pull something from consent?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to pull items C, F, G, and H.
Okay. Do I hear a motion on the remaining items?
Mayor, I move to approve consent agenda items 8A, B, D, and E.
Second.
I have a motion and second. Please vote.
Councilman Good? Passes 7-0.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem, item C.
Thank you. Yes, I would, after the discussion that we had in the study session, I think it's really appropriate that we pull that item and that we table it. Ask staff to come back and work with PDP, the chamber, come up with a comprehensive plan. I heard that over and over during the discussion. Let's talk about safety. Let's talk about all the many things that we can do to put together a comprehensive plan. So I think that's the best action.
Thank you for pulling that.
Councilwoman Scholl, do you have a comment?
Yep, totally agree with you, Mayor Pro Tem. I think, this is more than just one.
Right.
We need to do a comprehensive, holistic view of parking downtown instead of just doing this one thing at a time. So I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Other comments from the council?
Yeah, Mayor, I agree. I think it's really important that we include that education piece and also connect it with an upgrade and improvement in safety and lighting with the city parking garage. So it needs a little more comprehensive approach, and I recommend that we do that as well. Thank you.
Councilman Lamerson?
Thank you. I'm in full compliance with my fellow council members. Being a merchant downtown, I think it's important we have better knowledge than what we have.
Anyone else on this one? Motion for table?
Yeah, just motion to table, Mayor, and then I think staff has adequate direction at this point.
So
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
Okay.
I didn't make it, so
I make a motion to table.
Okay, we have a motion and second to table item C. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Okay, then items F, G, H. We had a review for each of these three employees earlier today. Contracts had been prepared, but after our discussion, there were a few minor changes that needed to be made to those contracts, and so they're coming around to you right now. And I would make a motion to approve these new amended contracts. And my understanding is we can do that in one motion for all three contracts.
And I'll second
it.
Okay, motion and second. Any discussion? Please vote. I'm going to make Maureen run back over here. She's trying to get to a Baltic cruise, so don't feel too bad for her.
Do we want to read any of them?
Who was the motion and the second again?
So I made a motion.
And I second it.
Okay.
Passes 7-0.
Okay. Let's move on to consent ordinance.
Adopt ordinance number 2019-1674, authorizing the purchase and acceptance of public drainage easements from Keith E. Bochat and from Stephen R. Batt, and authorizing the mayor and staff to execute any and all documents to effectuate said purchases and acceptance.
Okay, entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move to adopt consent ordinance item 8A.
Second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Okay, let's move on to the regular agenda, item 9A, please.
Appointment of member to the Youth Advisory Board and to approve recommendations for the chair and vice chair positions.
So what I understand is that person is not available today?
No, Mayor, I don't believe he's here.
Okay, so we'll do a motion and then you'll take care of swearing in at some later date.
Yes.
Okay, we'll entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move to approve the recommendations of the council subcommittee for appointments to the Youth Advisory Board to fill an immediate vacancy, and to approve recommendations for the chair and vice chair positions as presented in attachment 1.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Any discussion?
Mayor, if I may,
Yep.
as the council liaison, we unfortunately had one of our valued members had to move across the country, and so that's why he had to resign, and we were really saddened by him leaving. And so I know it seems like we've had a couple vacancies filled since this board has been created. So we're still getting our feet under us, but we're doing good things.
Well, and I always want to mention here on behalf of the council to all of you volunteers out there that work so hard on all these committees, boards, and commissions. Thank you for your efforts. We could not do our city business without all of these volunteers, so thank you so much. If no other discussion, please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Okay, let's move on to item 9B.
Overview of the 2019 legislative session by Barry Aarons.
Barry, always good to see you. Thanks for coming up.
Mr. Mayor, it's always a pleasure to be up here, especially on the first day that it's going to 110 plus in Phoenix. I got up here and the temperature was 87 degrees, and I said, this is good. This is a great client. I thank you very much. I will not take too much of your time, but we had a very good session this year as far as the city of Prescott and our citizens are concerned. I want to do a couple of introductions, if it's all right with you, and a couple of thank yous. First of all, I want to introduce Angelica Terrazas, who was here at one of our strategic planning sessions. She's moving towards becoming my senior associate, probably will do that by the end of the summer, and I wanted her to become more familiar with some of the things that we cover. Secondly, I won't have some thank yous. I want to thank Mayor Mangarelli. Whenever I said, hey, can you come down and visit with the President of the Senate? He was on his horse and he came down and we had good meetings. And I think those meetings had a lot to do with why things were pushed over the finish line. So I appreciate that. Vice Mayor Orr, on one of our key bills, you were down there several times, and I appreciate that. And I also wanted to thank Michael Lamar and John Palladini. They're both available whenever I need him, and John sometimes gets some really curious questions from me with regard to legislation. But most of all, I want to thank Tyler Goodman. He gets calls at some strange hours of the day and night because I need to clarify what our city's position is based on the plan that we passed last fall, which is our position on legislative issues. And Tyler does a terrific job. He's extremely responsive, and I think I thank him very much for his willingness to participate with me. The session lasted 135 days, which was about 131 days longer than I think it should have gone. It adjourned at 12:58 a.m. On Memorial Day night or the following morning. We followed 88 bills for the city of Prescott plus the budget. And we tried to make sure that we articulated positions on those bills that were consistent with that legislative plan that you adopted last fall. I want to go over about 7 items that I think are important to be highlighted. First one is water. We did pass the DCP legislative enactment. It was passed right at the deadline, but that, of course, is the nature of the legislative process, that if they have a deadline, they wait till the last minute to get things passed. It's a good plan. Then California followed suit. They adopted theirs. And for those of you who think that absolutely nothing gets done in Washington, D.C., the congressional delegation in a bipartisan manner got Congress to approve the DCP plan. So that's kind of a done deal now. Obviously, there are other water issues that are going to take priority as time moves on. But I'm very pleased to say that that's behind us now, and hopefully it'll last for several years as this drought issue continues to plague us. Secondly, House Bill 2464, which is the bill that would expand WIFA, the Water Infrastructure Financing Authority, from a limit of 50,000 population up to 150,000. And that's good for us because we are gradually growing to that, as is, some other communities. We worked on that for several clients, City of Prescott, of course, and also the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association that we represent. During the course of that, I had talked to legislator T.J. Shope, the House Speaker Pro Tem, who was the sponsor of this bill. And I said, why do we even have a limit on it? He says, oh, if you want to remove the limit, I'm okay with that. So we may be looking at that. That won't have a direct effect on Prescott for a number of years, I suspect, but that's something we want to take into consideration. Second item of priority is the budget. I'm very pleased to report that there was $1 million a year for 7 years put into the base budget. That is for our PSPRS Hotshots obligation. I will tell you, you can thank Senate President Karen Fann. She took it on her shoulders. She carried it. She rammed it through when it needed to, and she said, this is what I need. It's got to happen, and it did happen. And let me explain to you just briefly. When I say it's baked into the base budget, that's important because that's the starting point of the budget every year. JLBC, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, the legislators' budget, they come out in the fall and then in early January, and they say this is the base budget. That means that $1 million a year will be in that. When the governor comes out with his base budget, that will be in his base budget. So I'm very comfortable in saying that is as close to guaranteed funding as you can possibly get to, given any other circumstance that might occur. Secondly, there was $1 million that was allocated from the State Aviation Fund for the Prescott Airport. And you can thank Noel Campbell for that. He jumped up and down, yelled and screamed, said, I'm not voting for the budget until I get that. There was a little bit of a question about whether we could actually allocate that money. Legislature went ahead and did it, believing from their rules attorneys and legislative counsel that it was, in fact, permissible. So that money is available. How that's going to match up against federal funds and so on, I don't know the answer to that at this moment in time, but I'm sure that we will be able to work through that, and it will be very helpful in the expansion plans that we have for the airport. The Wayfair, which was the internet sales, there was an agreement made, an agreement with the League of Cities and Towns and a whole bunch of other people that were involved in that, and I carried the water for the city of Prescott and the city of Scottsdale on that issue. We think we got a reasonable solution to that. It will increase your revenues. There were a couple of things that were left out of that. One was automobile dealerships. That was something that was going to have to be given no matter what we did. And the other was fertilizer sale. And I find it interesting that the legislature exempted fertilizer sale from that agreement, but they did. And we did some research. Tyler helped me out finding just how much revenue we get from fertilizer sale, and we didn't think it was enough to hold up the process. But it did get passed, and that's important. One downside note, we have always supported the VLT, that bill. I know that Noel sponsored it last year, and then he wasn't real happy that he did sponsor it. Last year, if you'll remember, the Department of Transportation said that that would be $18, turned out to be $32, and of course there was an awful lot of consternation about that. And what they decided was they're going to phase it out over 2 years. The unfortunate part is that money would have gone to DPS, and if it went to DPS, that would free up that amount of money for HERF funding. We'll just have to find other avenues to raise that HERF and get more money allocated there. But that happened. Frankly, it held the budget up for a day or so because one of the senators said that she absolutely could not vote for the budget if that was going to be retained, and that they made that decision to phase it out over 2 years, which means it'll be on next year's renewals, and then it will not be on the third year renewal. So if you are renewing your car, you might want to take that into consideration. And I'm sure Mr. Palladini will jump on me for giving legal advice without being a member of the bar. A couple of other bills that are important. Number one, 2318, which was the hands-free bill, which we got passed. There was another bill, and that was driving while distracted bill, which was complementary. They didn't cancel each other out. There was a lot of concern about, well, if they both pass, which takes effect and so on. Well, they both did pass, but the governor vetoed the distracted driving bill. He felt that that was something that wasn't necessary and wasn't vetted out appropriately, but the governor did sign the hands-free bill, and that was a Prescott initiative. You can be very proud of the fact that it was the Prescott Council that instructed me to take that down and say, we want this, and it is now statewide. A little bit of explanation. It doesn't go into effect in its entirety till January 1, 2021. However, we were able to put in, and I spent a couple of days doing some negotiations between Kate Brophy-McGee and David Livingston, trying to bridge a gap between them, and we were successful. And the gap was a city council may adopt the state legislation as its ordinance whenever you want to. And I know that Mr. Palladini has been working on an ordinance. All you got to do is now pass it, and we're good. And by the way, for those cities that did not have an ordinance, or that did already have an ordinance that had been passed, they can move to the state plan immediately. Anybody else who doesn't want to have it, there will be warnings authorized to give out for utilization of your phone when you're driving. However, on January 1, 2021, the whole state has a complete plan. Did you want to comment,
We already
John?
have one in place,
Okay.
so we're good.
So we are good. And again, I want to thank you for your support on that. That was very helpful. A couple more bills that deserve a little bit of, one is a fun one for Prescott, and that was Senate Bill 1139, which states that forever Legislative District 1 will include Prescott. It will always be Legislative District 1. I can tell you that I couldn't believe the battle we had on that in the House. All right? I'm not going to go through it. We don't have the time. But if you want to hear some really funny stories about some of the objections to doing that, ask me after the meeting or another time, and I'll tell you about that. But that did pass. That was President Phan's initiative. It makes sense. First capital of Arizona. It's always been Legislative District 1. It was a good idea. Online lodging marketplace, there were two bills that passed. One is 2027. That codified an agreement that my staff was able to work out with the Department of Revenue to make sure that they are allocating and allotting tax revenues from hotel taxes that are the same as the online marketplace taxes. They agreed to that in October. I actually have it in writing. And then they said we would like to see it codified. State Representative John Kavanaugh of Fountain Hills did actually sponsor the legislation. It was a little bit rocky for a while, but we ultimately got it passed. So that has effectively taken care of that problem. The second leg of that was House Bill 2672, and that was also Mr. Kavanaugh's bill, and that was to make sure that we maintain and retain our ordinance authority over some of these. Some of the problems that they've been having in Scottsdale with some of these quote-unquote party houses that were violating the nuisance ordinances and so on, and there was a question about whether you could, what you could do about that, and whether the ordinances that cover those types of things would be applicable. That's been taken care of now. I want to thank Mr. Palladini, who helped us through that and gave me advice on the language. Thank you very much. That was also very helpful. Just two more. One is this new thing. Now that we talked about the online lodging marketplaces, here comes peer-to-peer car sharing. And peer-to-peer car sharing looks like, smells like, tastes like a car rental, but it isn't exactly that. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but if you have a car, you can put it up on an online platform and rent it out. And there were two bills. One bill that the industry wanted to get passed, and another bill that the existing rent-a-car companies wanted to get passed. And it was a bloody battle. And I was involved in it more deeply for my tourism clients, because the issue came up as to whether those companies would have to charge the surcharges for rental cars that help the tourism industry both statewide and specifically in Maricopa County. And what ultimately happened was neither bill passed. And the good news about that is there is a Department of Revenue a determination and a legal opinion that say that those companies do have to charge those rental car surcharges. So whatever benefit we're getting out of that is retained at the present time, although I do suspect that that'll come back again next year and have to be worked out. The last bill that I wanted to mention to you is vapor products. There was another really big battle, and that was over the regulation and enforcement of vapor products, and I was involved in it for you and also for the county school superintendents. There were some very significant concerns as to whether this bill would have allowed nicotine products. It's not tobacco, but it is nicotine products to be used and to be more available to kids. And there were two bills introduced. One was sponsored by the tobacco industry who manufactures these things, and another bill was by a group called Smoke 21, I think was their name, or something 21. And they've been trying to raise the smoking age from 18 to 21, and the tobacco companies took that and said, oh, that's a great idea. We'll call ourselves. We'll do the same thing. We'll say we want to raise it. But at the same time, they were going to impact our ordinance authority over what we could do in terms of restricting the sale of those things. And here was the catch. Because of the way that was written and the ordinances, it is possible that you could have an adult store that is currently prohibited from being within a certain number of feet. Is it 300 feet or something like that from a school? But that if you were selling, if more than 50% of your sales was from vaping, you would not have that ordinance apply. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Anyway, both of those bills failed also. So whatever is on the books now is still on the books. Whatever you've got in terms of ordinances, in terms of restrictions, continue to be in effect, and you can enforce them, and that's that. So that's the highlights of the issues that I spent most of my time on your behalf down at the session this year. There were, scores of other bills that we watched and helped, and many of those were the position of the League of Cities and Towns was what we kind of said, yeah, me too, me too, me too. And we didn't have to do a lot of individual work, and the League did a really good job this year. I think that Nick Ponder and his staff at the League of Cities and Towns really turned a corner this year for the League. I think the League's level of respect has gone up in terms of their legislative representation. So I appreciate their help and the fact that they were always available and willing to work with us. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd be more than happy to entertain any questions.
Yes. Well, thanks again, Barry. And for the record, We have 3 great legislators, and we do appreciate Noel Campbell, his work to get us $1 million for that airport terminal. We know he led out on that, and we appreciate that. I did call him in that regard. Senator Fan, having her as the president, she did a tremendous job. We're very proud of her and her leadership down there. And Steve Pierce stepping in and did a great job as well. So thanks for your work. I want to thank our legislators for their work. And you stole my thunder on Mr. Goodman, because he did a great job, and we recognize we got a good one, and his work working with you guys down there. So thanks for pointing that out. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, Barry, when I read this, it kind of asked for ideas that we might want to share with you for something in the future. You maybe heard us earlier on talking about the movie Wishman. That was filmed here in Prescott mainly. It was at Steve Pierce's ranch and Seligman and here in Prescott. The important thing to me was the reason we got that filmed here was because Frank Shankwitz said, if you want to make this a movie on my book, it's got to be done in the city of Prescott. It just generated a lot of revenue, a lot of local support. I think it would be really good if we could work with, I know Wendy Bridges has been working on this, but work with trying to get some sort of tax credit or something so that we don't lose all that business to New Mexico. When we did the movie for the 19, that went to New Mexico. That should have been here in Prescott, but because we did not have the incentive to have them come do it here, we lost that business. I think it would just be great, bring that back to Prescott. We did it how many years ago? So we could work on that. I know you said it's an uphill battle.
Yeah, if I may, Mayor, comment on that. In 2005, we passed a bill that would have allowed for a transferable tax credit, and frankly, it was, for the most part, not well crafted. And because of it, you had a lot of people buying and selling tax credits, but they never used it for what it was supposed to be used for. In 2010, we came back and said what we'd like to do is a refundable tax credit, which is more easily trackable, and you can't just buy and sell them. You actually have to say, here's the work that we did, here's how much it was, here's what the tax was, and so on. That went down in flames 4 years in a row, although, frankly, we thought we had the votes, but the Speaker of the House at that time was adamantly opposed to that type of tax credit. Now, full disclosure, I also represent the Arizona Film and Media Coalition, which is an organization of a lot of people who are in that business all over the state. We've got an amazing number of people that are involved. And we've been working on some things. You have to pick and choose what you want to fight on. A broad-based income tax refundable credit will not get out of the starting blocks. That's reality. On the other hand, a reimbursement program for certain taxes after the fact, such as reimbursement for sales taxes made for purchases made in connection, reimbursement for contracting taxes for sets and so on and so forth, reimbursement maybe for payroll taxes for people who come in after that you can show this is what we did, could be enough to at least bring in some of the small and medium-sized budget items. You know, for example, there is there were some Dodge truck commercials, and you've probably seen them, and they were all done down in Swarita at an abandoned Freeport-McMoran mine down there. And we could get more of those, and those are worth probably mid to upper six figures in terms of economic activity, and that's just the direct. Remember that when you're talking about these projects, you're talking about direct, you're talking about indirect economic activity, and you're talking about induced economic activity, so that if we can get the direct activity to have some type of assistance to lure it here, there's going to be an indirect benefit and induced benefit down the economic slope, so to speak. So I just coincidentally met with them. She did not know this before she asked the question. I met with the Film Media Coalition Executive Group yesterday at my office, and they have 3 ideas that they are percolating right now. They're having their meeting on July 16th, and I will let Tyler know where they go, and if the city of Prescott would like to support that initiative, I would love to have that help.
Can I ask you where the league would stand on that?
I suspect, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, I would suspect that they most likely would be supportive, but you have to remember that this is a revenue in, revenue out kind of circumstance, and it depends on whether you budget statically or dynamically. If you budget statically, you're going to lose revenue. If you budget dynamically, you're actually going to make revenue. Unfortunately, Joint Legislative Budget Committee only budgets statically. So they will tell the legislature how much this is going to cost in lost revenue. It's our job to come back and say, well, that may be true, but if all the economic activity comes in, here's the revenue that we're going to make that we would not have otherwise had.
Thank you.
Councilman Good?
Thank you, Barry. I want to acknowledge and let you know how much we appreciate your advocacy and support for our legislative initiatives and keeping us informed of the legislative activity in the legislature that impacts us as a city and our community in general. As I mentioned before, I still want to move forward with the reform of the developmental impact fees and how they impact smaller communities. So I know in last legislative session, some of the builders associations were not too willing to engage in this because of their claim they had other legislative priorities. And I hope with that passed now, we can generate some legitimate movement in this area in the next legislative session.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Good, as I told you earlier today and as we've been talking about, I've got several organizations that I think we need to engage on this issue. It's my plan to engage them probably starting somewhere around the middle to the end of July and see if we can't put together a package of reforms that might at least assist us in some respect. It's kind of a messy system, as you and I have talked about in the past, but we'll have to evaluate that. But we will be doing some stakeholder meetings, and at the appropriate time, it might be appropriate for one of you, two of you to engage in those meetings.
As you know, I'm a member of the Arizona League's Budget Finance and Economic Development group, and we had our first meeting, so there is agreement that the league will support moving forward with that particular issue. Another one that came up that seems on the surface to be appropriate is this concern about property owners in the Copper Corridor intentionally allowing properties to decline in condition so that they can claim that they are salvage status and drastically reduce their tax level so that they can maintain ownership of these properties with a hope in the long term that they will appreciate if there's redevelopment that goes on in these smaller communities. But it really degrades the condition of these small towns that don't have the resources to try to appeal some of these rulings. So it seems reasonable that some reform in this area, tax-based reform, is appropriate, but I'd like if you could look into that and give me your opinion on how legitimate it is and what the unintended consequences might be.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Good would be happy to look into that for you and talk probably to some folks at the league staff and see what they think also.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Ahrens.
Thank you.
Councilman Blair?
Thank you, Barry, for what you did down there, and I appreciate that. And now that I have my fishing pole and my tackle box, what do you think the attitude might be if the city brought some legislation that would have to do with creating a Granite Dills State Park initiative to be funded to purchase Granite Dills for a state park and show a profit and loss through ecotourism and the generation of sales tax revenue? Do you think there's any likelihood that they would even consider something like that?
Mayor Mangarelli, Councilman Blair, I have not looked into that, but I will tell you that that is not completely out of the realm of having been done before in other areas. I have to look at the land, see where the ownership of the land is, whether it's state land or federal land, and what any of the other applications that are on that. But Again, as with what Councilman Good requested, I'd like some time to look into it, do some due diligence, and then get back to you and let you know what the possibilities are on
I
that.
always feel like if, as a group of counselors here that are elected by the public, that we should broach all avenues, and if we don't, then shame on me. So I don't think it's something out of the realm of asking the question if we could create that state park in northern Arizona that would generate a long-term saving of private and public space for generation of revenue.
I will certainly get with the people who know about that, and we'll begin the process of looking and seeing what the possibilities are for that.
Appreciate it. Thank
You
you.
betcha.
Other questions, comments for Barry? Well, thanks again so much for your work this session. Thanks for coming up. It's good to hear from you.
Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Mayor and
All right.
members of the council.
Thank you, Barry.
Carefully.
Okay, let's move on to item 9C, please.
Adoption of resolution number 2019-1711, updating the city's council pension policy.
Thank you, Maureen. Mayor and council, as you'll recall, last year during the budget process, council adopted a budget funding policy, which was a good policy, still is a good policy. Subsequently, the legislature passed some requirements that council formally accept the assets, liabilities of their trusts as part of their annual policy budget. So this is in here just to update that one section of the policy, which is required by state law. It's in yellow there, which is just adopting our new assets and liabilities for our two PSPRS pension trusts. And as you can see, we're at $69 million unfunded liability, which is awesome considering where we were at $86 million a year ago.
Is that it?
It's all on this one.
I always say, I get excited about $69 million of debt, but I guess it's all relative when you were at $86 million of debt. There seems to be a little confusion out there in the community regarding what we said we're going to do and what we are doing, and I don't think there is confusion. I know that we were very clear that we are going to pay the annual required contribution from the general fund, which we're doing, and that we would use all of the money from the Proposition 443 to pay off the unfunded liability. And Mark, is that what we're doing?
Yes, that's what you're doing. That's what your policy says you'll do that you guys adopted last year right here. Again, this was in the policy before, maintain the ARC payments from the operating revenues. Council is committed to maintain the full ARC payments, normal costs, and unfunded pension liability amortization from operating funds. That's what we did last year, and that's what we're doing in the 2020 budget.
So the 443 is generating about $800,000 over what we anticipated.
Yes, that's the next budget. That's the next agenda item. But yes, it is.
Sorry to steal the thunder, but we talked about it generating about $1 million a month. It's been doing that, actually exceeding
A little
that.
bit more, yes.
Right. So furthermore, if the ARC would have increased year over year, then we'd have paid the full ARC from the general fund,
Yes, from our operating.
whatever it is,
Yes.
right?
That was the commitment council made in their policy.
Right. So, and then the last thing, based on the trajectory that we're on now, by the policy that I just described, do you anticipate that we will pay this off in less than 10 years?
Yeah, and my projection would be probably 8 is where we're going to pay it off. Definitely by the end of the 10.
So it's a pretty good plan, honestly, what we're doing, paying the ARC from the general fund and paying all of the 443 down on the unfunded liability. We're going to exceed the goal that we'd set out, which would be less than 10 years.
Yes, sir.
Questions, comments from the council? Councilman Good?
Yes, it's a laudable improvement from where we started, where we were less than 30% funded, and now we're at 46.3%. So that's a huge jump upwards, but we need to keep this in perspective. The Employment Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, which provides insurance to private corporations' pensions, will not even accept an application from a private pension that's less than 80% funded. They consider anything below 80% endangered anything below 70% severely endangered, anything below 60% critical, and anything below 50% lethal. And what does that mean? That means that regardless of the attempts to invest your way back into acceptable funding status, it's not possible without supplemental payments. So that's what we're doing, is we're supplementing the payments that are calculated by PSPRS, and PSPRS's calculations are based upon a 20-year amortization calculation, where we have 8.5 years left in our tax. So my assertion is that we should recalculate our own unfunded liability based upon an 8.5-year amortization schedule rather than accept PSPRS's 20. Their assumptions also mean that they expect to meet their 7.3% return on investment, which they have chronically underperformed in. So rather than expect that they're going to suddenly become capable, we should expect that they will continue to be the poorly performing investment team that they have been, and we should also calculate a higher payment based upon the assumption that they won't hit those numbers. So if we adopt all of those more realistic assumptions, then I agree with you, we'd have a pretty good chance of getting across the finish line in less than the 10-year limit. But if we continue to adopt these lowered unfunded liability requirements within the ARC, it's just as likely that we won't hit that target. So I'd rather be diligent about being connected with more realistic expectations rather than accept the projections from a organization within the state that has shown itself to be dramatically incapable. So a 46.3% is a good movement forward, but we've still got a long way to go. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So those are my comments and concerns.
And just if I could on those comments, again, this is 1 year after 1 year
Right.
of doing something. We went from 30% to 46%. Obviously, yes, if council directs, we can engage in actuarial and reevaluate our pension liability based on whatever assumptions council wants to make. But the PSPRS actuarial, which of course you're already paying for because it's part of your pension costs, is assuming, as you mentioned, 20-year. That was a closed 20-year, so there's 18 years left at this actuarial date. So with their assumptions, they're assuming we would pay it off in 18 years, putting in about $6 to $7 million a year. We are putting in close to $19 million a year, so we're essentially doing 3 times what their actuarials do. I mean, you can assume from that what you will, but despite the things you said, which I do not disagree with, Councilman, I think we are still on course to hit it well below the 18 years, probably closer to 8 years from the inception of our tax.
Okay. Barry, I'm glad you're still here. We didn't talk about PSPRS. This is something chronic that's got to be fixed at the state level. We're up here collecting taxes and throwing extra money at this, and it needs to be addressed. We've spoken to Karen Fan about it. We're doing our part up here, I believe, but the state legislature's got to do their part. They've got to fix this. This whole program is, I don't know, it just is not, it's not helping municipalities out here. We're mandated to use it, yet it's dysfunctional. So any work on that would be greatly appreciated. Councilman Sischka.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate Councilman Good's opinion, but that's what it is. It's his opinion. And what have we done? We have done exactly what we promised. We are paying the normal payment and the ARC, which we said we would do, and we're paying off the 3/4 cent 443 money to go specifically for paying off the unfunded liability for PSPRS. There was a person yesterday who asked why we were redirecting these funds. We are not redirecting any funds. We are doing exactly what we promised.
Any other questions, comments from the council? Any public comment on this, Maureen?
No, Mayor.
Okay. Entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move to adopt resolution number 2019-1711.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Okay, let's move on to item 9D, please.
Adoption of resolution number 2019-1707, approving transfer of certain fiscal year 2019 budget appropriations.
Thank you, Maureen. Mayor and council, as council adopts a tentative budget and a final budget each year, that sets the limits by fund, the limits by department. Throughout the year, projects come up, estimates change, council has projects that need to be done. We can do that. We just need to move budget appropriation. Again, this is not movement of dollars. This is just movement of budget appropriation to allow us to do it. Whenever we bring these things to you throughout the year, we mention that we'll be bringing it in our big reappropriation. So I've grouped these reappropriations we need for the fiscal 19 budget into three categories. The first one, as the mayor mentioned, is good news. The PSPR tax is coming in higher than we expected. I need budget appropriation to send that money to PSPRS. If council adopts it today, those monies will go out tomorrow to PSPRS. That's an $800,000 movement. Again, we have non-departmental contingency available. We just need to move it to the right line item of the budget. We received additional grants above or new grants during the year of $21,000, some minor movements there. We had about $495,000 of appropriation we need to move for some projects that came up this year, council-directed projects, other projects, including payment to the Hot Shot Memorial. We had an additional Citizens Academy, improvements at the airport terminal to handle the new flights being paid for out of our public buildings impact fee. Newspaper stands downtown, those coming in, additional funding for the Whiskey Off-Road tourism event, Wings Out West. There's a list of several different projects that council is aware of throughout the year. And additionally, our last two items there are internal service funds. Did not budget enough for revolving inventory, which means there were just some more expensive repairs that need to be done, so they need to buy goods and they need additional appropriation to do that. And this is in our budget because we're a home rule city, and that is part of our home rule limit. If we weren't, it wouldn't be. And then some additional facilities needs that came up this year. With that, I'd be glad to answer any additional questions.
Thank you, Mark. Questions, comments from the council? Public comment?
No, Mayor.
All right, entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move to adopt resolution number 2019-1707.
Second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Let's move on to item 9E, please.
Adoption of resolution number 2019-1708, adopting the tentative budget for fiscal year 2020 and setting the public hearing for the final budget, expenditure limitation, and tax levies for the city of Prescott.
Thank you again, Maureen. Mayor and council, we had our workshop on May 21st. The budget has moved slightly. There was like $15,000 worth of grants that weren't in that budget, so the number is essentially the same. As you can see, we had our operating budget at 5.7, up 5.7% to $99,265,543. Total budget $220,068,922. As Maureen mentioned, this is the setting this tentative budget. The budget cannot be increased over this tentative amount between now and the final. It can be reduced. This sets three public hearings: the final budget public hearing, the expenditure limit, as well as the property tax levy are all being set for the June 25th meeting. And it also authorizes us to publish the resolution adopting the tentative budget along with the Schedule A, which is the primary schedule that summarizes the budget, if I can get to it. there will be published in the paper for two times or once a week for 2 consecutive weeks. And then again, the hearings will be on the 25th, and after that, at a special meeting, council will consider the budget. With that, I'd be glad to answer any more questions.
Thank you, Mark. Questions, comments from the council? Councilman Good?
Well, obviously, you all know that I have a disagreement on the PSPRS allocation. So, because it's not sufficient, in my opinion, I will be a no vote on this.
Okay. Any other questions, comments from the council? Public comment?
No, Mayor.
Entertain a motion?
Mayor, I move to adopt resolution number 2019-1708.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Please vote.
Passes 6-1.
Okay. Let's move on to item 9F, please.
Approval to issue a request for proposals for the redevelopment of city municipal properties.
Mayor and council, what you have in front of you is a draft RFP. This draft RFP brings forward the recommendation of the Mayor's Commission on Facility Optimization and Property Usage, FOPU, which is an unfortunate acronym in my opinion, for our facilities and properties here located on Cortez. It was FOPU's recommendation to shop this locale. And the primary reason for that, I think, were multiple. The first is complete design inefficiencies in this building. It's deteriorating building condition. I guess I could put John's building in the same category of this building. You have leaks too. But most importantly, it's inconveniences to our citizens and customers trying to maneuver around what I best could describe as a hodgepodge of facilities. Additionally, I think FOPU felt, and I agree, that this locale may be better utilized by the private sector, maybe for a mixed-use development project. And that goes along, too, with Ron Drake's visit and the priorities of many local stakeholders beyond Ron Drake that they shared with him, that more downtown living is something that I think is very desirable for this community, and that possibly if we did something like this, we could spearhead that charge. And I think it's important for everybody in here and for everybody watching that this is merely an exploration of possibilities, and absolutely no decision has been made to move our operations anywhere. To use a fishing analogy, we're really just putting a piece of bait at the end of the line and see if the right fish takes the bait. In my opinion, if not, we're no worse off than we are now. So I'd open it up for you guys to have any comments and questions about it.
Yeah, very good. You know, I asked you at one point, Michael, with this proposal, it doesn't include the annex, finance, HR, but you'd mentioned to me that that could be added.
Yeah, we've mandated a site visit by anybody interested. And at that time, I will definitely tell them that the properties that include the police department, the parking lot with the police department and HR could possibly be part of the equation. But in order to incentivize us to move all that, it would really have to be a heck of a deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how the city has grown over the years. It's been kind of organic, and when we needed more space, there was an adjacent property, whether it be where legal is now or HR finance. We have Virginia Street with engineering over there, and so it's kind of been, you know, over time we needed to grow a little bit, and at that time we would, you know, acquire property and expand, but now we've got kind of this unique hodgepodge of buildings, and it makes it somewhat difficult for the public at times to navigate. Where do I go to get certain services? So that was number one on our list. During those conversations, I want to just bring some clarity. A lot of different properties the city has out there. One of them is the rodeo grounds. The rodeo grounds was discussed, and it was never suggested that we would sell the rodeo grounds. What was suggested was that it could be better utilized. It could be improved for rodeo plus, whatever. But never did that group ever talk about selling the rodeo grounds. It's very important that people understand we have a great partnership with those folks at the rodeo, and we would never obviously want to see the world's oldest rodeo go away. So that's important clarity on that. I'm excited for this to see what may come, because it's, you know, the next step of probably several dozen or more. As you've insinuated, this is not an end all. This is just a beginning to try to explore what could be. So I'm excited to see what this brings. Questions or comments from the council? Councilman Blair?
Yeah, I think it's okay, as you put it, to have your pole out in the water, but my question would be is, do we have a plan to relocate? And I mean, when you start talking about what are we going to do, is anybody got an idea about possibly using the Miller Valley School property and purchasing it to build a central complex? I mean, do we have a vision to sell? We should have a vision to buy or relocate. I mean, I think we should be looking at that.
Yeah, no, it's good point. And we don't, to answer your question, have a plan. I think what this does is bring more data to the decision making to know, what are we sitting on here? Are we thinking this is worth $1 million or $5 million, or what could it be? Furthermore, could parts of City Hall that are crucial for the public be incorporated into a design where you could then, you know, have it a mixed use with City Hall included in that? Could be a possibility. So we don't have enough information. I know that we did hear from FOPU that they liked the idea of the main functions of city government be in the downtown corridor, and that was important for us to know moving forward. Councilman Lamerson.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with FOPU on that. I think it's critical to keep. Should I said FOPU?
The commission. There you go.
All right. I really think it's important to keep city government downtown. Now, having said that, you know, we can't make an intelligent decision until you know what we have, and you're not going to know what we have until Michael puts out an RFP to find out what we have. And so once we know what we have, we can be, you know, knowledge is a good thing.
And I think this morning you guys saw what I would describe as a very successful public-private partnership. One of the things we need to be as a local government is know our own limitations about creativity. We don't have much in most cases. Let's see what the private sector comes up with.
Yeah, I think that's important, Michael. I mean, City Hall may not necessarily have to be right in the middle of downtown. Downtown now goes all the way out to Miller Valley School. So you might be better off, is this the best and highest use for this property, or could it be a convention visitor center, something of that nature that is built on a, and we don't know that.
No.
So anyway.
Good. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, Michael, I appreciate this. I don't know how many times I've said, swear with that RFP. So appreciate that you're putting this together and passing it by quite a few people. It's very interesting. I'm excited to find out whether or not we get something back from this, and we'll know then, and then we can move forward with that plan. Steve, that I think is absolutely agree with that. We need the data. And we're trying to make decisions based on data rather than just what we think. And so I think this is a great step forward, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we get back.
Any other comments from the council? Public comment?
No, Mayor.
Okay, we'll entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move to issue the request for proposals for city municipal properties.
Second.
Have a motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 9G, please.
Approval of city contract with Entellus Incorporated for engineering design services for the Zone 56 1.5 MG water tank and piping project.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Eric Bay with Public Works. This next item is for design and engineering services for our Zone 56 tank and piping project. This project has a significant number of moving parts and a bit of history, so I could fill you in with details all day, but I won't do that. I'll try to give you some of the highlights and keep my presentation brief. In general, Zone 56 is a water pressure zone that serves customers along the SR 69 corridor between Heather Heights and Holiday Drive. And the tank for that zone is located back in Prescott Canyon Estates. We're proposing to relocate that tank behind York Motors off of Prescott Lakes Parkway, and what that will do is raise the hydraulic grade line of that zone by about 100 feet. So why is that significant? So most of the SR69 corridor can be served off of the hydraulic grade line for the existing Zone 56, but Frontier Village cannot. So to serve Frontier Village, what we need is an additional pump station, an additional tank, and currently we have 3 additional PRV stations, pressure reducing valve stations, to serve the entire Frontier Village. With this new hydraulic grade line, we will be able to serve most of the SR69 corridor off the Zone 56. And then we'll provide a new PRV station with the project to serve the lower areas of Prescott Canyon Estates. So reconfiguration that we're proposing, by moving one tank, we're going to be able to eliminate another tank, a booster station, 3 PRV stations, all the O&M that comes with it, possible rehabilitation costs, and eventually replacement costs. So it's a huge advantage for water operations. It's a great project all around. The city direct selected a qualified firm from their statements of qualifications that were submitted for the FY19 through FY24 on-call professional design services solicitation. We have negotiated a scope and fee, and we are recommending award at this time. And before I take questions, I wanted to let you know that we do have an additional booster station that has been previously designed in this area. Like I said, this project has a lot of moving parts. Since design's already complete, we're not approaching you with that today, but when I come back after design for the 56 tank and pipeline is complete, it will be a tank, booster station, and pipeline project that I bring for construction. And now I'll take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Eric. Questions, comments from the council? Councilman Good?
Yeah, Eric, what's your estimate of the total cost of this project?
Total construction cost? So, of course, the engineer will develop an engineer's opinion of probable cost. If I had to ballpark an estimate right now, I would say $4 to $4.5 million is what I'm going to be coming in for at the end of the design period.
I know we're obligated to provide water to the tribe. At what level are we required to do that? It shouldn't be just open-ended and whatever they need, we
Well,
a big dollar amount of project.
It actually, in terms of volume, it is sort of open-ended, but it's only on that land that was reservation land at the time. So if they were to add, acquire new land and then convert it to tribal land, it wouldn't necessarily apply. As far as the standard goes, it briefly or in a nutshell, we have to provide adequate fire flows and things like that. That's why, as you recall, the project to the resort casino, the fire flows I think were 10% or something of what they should have been, really low. So I don't know if this is for that requirement, but
No, we have previously addressed fire flow concerns up to Bucky's Casino, and that's water pressure zone 76. This corridor has quite a benefit to the city. We're not only serving tribal areas along SR 69, which we can presently do today, but we're making the entire corridor more efficient. We're removing a whole slew of infrastructure that would require future rehabilitation replacement costs. So it's a simplification of our system, as well as the ability to provide fire flows and volumes where required.
and the agreement does say that if there's any non-tribal benefit, so even if it were 5% benefit to the city, 95% to the tribe, the agreement provides that the city pays for all of it, essentially. So it's an old agreement, had to do with water rights, but that's what we're kind of stuck with. And as far as the tribal, but I don't know. I mean, you guys could address: is this primarily a tribal benefit, or is it? Okay.
No, the tribal benefit is just a subsidiary benefit in here. The primary focus of this project through the water model was identified on deficiencies for the corridor as a whole. Some of the primary areas in there is going to be lows and/or additional properties that are vacant next to Lowe's in there.
State trust land?
No, there are private properties there between U-Haul and the Lowe's in there. But yes, it was the primary focus was the deficiency in the whole corridor. Then there, as Eric stated, there's a secondary benefit to reducing our overall facilities and infrastructure maintenance needs in the tribal area by being able to eliminate a pump station, tank, PRVs, and that with the completion of this project. So there's multiple benefits, and yes, the tribal property does have that subsidiary.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think the tribe has a long-term plan to put a major additional resort in that area across from Pioneer Village. Is that correct?
There has been considerations on their part for a new casino on the property that's immediately west of U-Haul.
Right. Now, will this be able to handle that should it come to reality?
Yes, it will.
All right.
Good questions, Councilman. Councilman Blair.
That's the same question I was going to ask. That I hope that this project is upsized enough to take in the whole corridor at full build-out.
Yes, it will be.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments from the council? Public comment?
No, Mayor.
Entertain a motion?
Mayor, I move to approve city contract number 2019-236.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Let's move on to item 9H, please.
Approval of license agreement and video services application with Uniform Video Services Provider Cable TV.
So, Mayor and Council, as you know, we have what are called franchise agreements or license agreements with various utilities, and it allows those utilities to use our rights of way for lines, whether it's wet utility or dry utility. Cox Cable, a couple years back, went to the legislature and proposed a statewide franchise that the cable companies could go in, a pretty powerful lobbying group. So they proposed that for cable companies to go into the Secretary of State and be able to obtain statewide cable franchise or video service provider franchises. That idea was sort of shut down, negotiated with the League of Cities to the bill that we're sort of dealing with now, which is rather they still have to go city to city to obtain their license or franchise, but there's a statewide form agreement. So every city is going to use the same form of license agreement or franchise agreement. That agreement was created by a group of attorneys, city attorneys through the league, and it was negotiated with a couple of the big cable companies, video service providers. This came up because our local cable company, Cable One, which I think is coming up with a new name, a new trade name, their license is up in August, or their franchise is up in August. And so what you'll see a couple months from now is they want to extend their current license in the current form through the end of the calendar year, and then in January they will come in and apply for a new franchise agreement. And if by approving this form and application, that will be the form and application that they would come and fill out and then sign, and then you would ultimately approve it for their use of rights of way. It doesn't really change any of the business points. We still get 5% of revenues. We get 4 channels. I think now we have 3, 2 HD TV and 2 standard or digital. And so by approving this simply kind of takes a step in that direction where when Cable One or any other, if there's another video service provider that would come to town, they would actually get the same type of franchise agreement, so it kind of levels the playing field. Also, I will tell you, these agreements are usually 10 years long, for good reason, because they seems like they take a year to negotiate. So by having a standard form agreement, I think it saves a lot of staff time. We're comfortable with this form of agreement because, like I said, it was kind of created by a group of city attorneys with the league, and then sort of negotiated with Cox Cable primarily. And so everybody's in agreement that this form is a solid form. Doesn't give us everything. Certainly doesn't give the cable companies everything, but it's a good compromise and a good form. So by approving this, it will be on file with the clerk's office, and then when Cable One comes in or any other provider comes in, we'll use this same form. Still has to go through the council approval process, but it won't change revenues, and it won't change our use of the government TV channels.
Okay. Questions, comments from the council? Public comment?
No, Mayor.
Entertain motion?
Mayor, I move to approve Prescott Uniform Video Service Agreement and form of application.
Second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
All right, let's move on through the alphabet here to 9I.
Adopt resolution number 2019-1710 regarding the city council rules of procedure.
I can just introduce this real quick. As you know, your current policy to put something on an agenda at a council-initiated level requires either the mayor or 2 council members. This proposal would change that to allow for any council member to put something on a council agenda.
Okay, questions, comments from the council? Councilman Good?
Thank you, Mayor. This is a issue that I requested to be considered by the council as, quite frankly, a response to the open meeting law sanction that we received from the Attorney General after the David Stringer resolution occurred. It occurred to me after this that this particular policy puts us in jeopardy of possibly creating an open meeting law violation. I recall a issue that I asked to be brought forward to the council, and I did get my first request granted by another council member, which then was withdrawn. I then had to go to a second council member that fortunately agreed with me, but if that council member had said no, then that issue is dead. If I go to an additional member, I violated open meeting law because 4 council members have deliberated in advance of an agenda item. That concerns me. If we're elected to represent our constituents and they expect us to deal with issues of concern, we should be able to bring those forward without having to have some ability to be clairvoyant on which council members we have to approach and get their agreement on. When you think about this, if 2 council members say no, the remaining 5 might want to approve this item, but we couldn't even discuss it. So I polled all the other Quad City and county governments in the area to find out what their policies were. Yavapai County supervisors only need an individual supervisor to bring it forward. Of course, their chairman and their county administrator can bring items forward on their own volition. Dewey-Humboldt, same thing. Any one of their town council members can bring an item forward along with their mayor and their town manager. Chino Valley has a policy similar to ours with a requirement that 1 additional council member agree. But when I explained this to Darrell Croft and the potential risk that's involved, he said, yeah, we need to look at that and change it as well. Prescott Valley, I thought, was particularly interesting because when I talked to the mayor, he said, gee, I'm not really sure exactly what our policy is, but let me walk across the hall and talk to the town attorney. And he came back and said, I can do it, the town manager can do it, but we need a majority of the remaining council members to agree. Now, if that is actually true, that is a direct violation of open meeting law because they have to discuss a majority approval before an item is even discussed in an open meeting. So he was saying, boy, we need to fix that right away. So I think it just makes a lot of sense to eliminate that, and that relieves us of any potential risk in this area, and I think it really supports quite frankly, representative government where we're elected to represent the constituents that vote for us, and we should be able to represent their interests and bring an item forward. Why this was adopted, I think it was, 10 or 12 or more years ago. There probably was a good reason at the time, but I think considering the open meeting law risk that we have that's legitimate, that we should modify that and allow individual members to bring items forward.
Mr. Palladini, could you speak to this concept that Councilman Good has brought? We've functioned pretty well under this charter. Is there an alternative to one council member, going person to person on the council?
I don't think that's quite an accurate analysis. What we do is, as you recall from training, you're allowed to ask another council, or allowed to say to another council person, let's say, I would like this item on the agenda, a description. What you're not allowed to do is advocate or say why. I'd like to discuss putting a traffic light on at some intersection. You're not advocating why. You're not going into explanation. So that is allowable. That's what even the Attorney General's training allows for, that kind of discussion. I think what Councilman Good is talking about is that it's too easy to take the next step, and that is, I'd like to discuss this item because, and then all of a sudden you could have this sort of linear meeting, or daisy chaining, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know what Prescott Valley's philosophy is with that. I would have to assume that they probably have an agenda, an item on their agenda that says items, and the council has to sort of vote on it. I would assume at an open meeting, if that in fact is their situation, because I would agree that's kind of too risky, and it is, again, it is too easy to have too much conversation, and that's I think where the risk arises from these kinds of things. I think a possible solution is what we tell our boards and commissions, and that is if you want to put something on an agenda item for your board or commission, use your staff liaison to shop it around to see if there's other people who want to put this on the agenda, whatever your rules are for putting something on the agenda. Now, generally speaking, most of our boards and commissions agendas are staff-driven. They aren't necessarily member-driven, unlike the city council. So one of the workarounds could be that you would use the clerk's office. If you want to put something on an agenda that's not staff-driven, the clerk would get an email or some sort of notice, I want to discuss this item at a council meeting, and the clerk would put out, does anybody else want to put this on put this on a council agenda, with a big giant all caps, do not reply all, which is what we always tell people to put on their emails. And then if somebody else wants to sign on to it, then the clerk would just note that it's this councilman and this councilman, and you get two people. So there is a workaround.
Which happens already, John, with presentations or proclamations.
Right. So there is that workaround. But certainly it's within the council's purview to decide to allow for a single council person, other than obviously we have the mayor can put something on an agenda. It's certainly within the council's purview to change its policy. I think this policy was refined or updated December, a year plus ago, December. We did some cleanup. This particular rule has been in effect, I think you're correct, Councilman Good, for quite some time, since before I got here. I don't know the rationale behind it. I don't know why it's 2. I understand why it's probably not 3 or 4 or more.
History lesson?
Sure.
The reason why it was done is because there was things that were being brought up to the city council that were absolutely ridiculous, and there was no way to control what was being brought to the dais. And due to the fact that the mayor is the mayor, he had one vote, and if anybody on council, rather than me putting ridiculous stuff every single meeting to be talked about, it took that away because you had to have a second vote with another city councilman. So that's why that was done.
Councilman Lamerson.
Thank you. I was here at the time too, and I agree exactly with what Blair says. On the other hand, I also think that, you have 7 elected people here by the majority of the people in the city of Prescott. I respect every one of them and have for many years. I mean, we've had numerous councils. I think that any city councilman that wants to bring something, have it put on the agenda, they were duly elected by the people. I don't have a problem with one person being able to say, hey, I'd like this on the agenda. City manager can. city mayor can. City council should be able to also. Just my opinion.
Councilwoman Scholl.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, this is an interesting topic, and I guess I kind of fall on the line that I don't think there's necessarily a problem with the way we do things now. I think having 2 council members is a way to vet ideas before the entire council talks about them. I know recently we've been really trying to streamline and make our meetings efficient, to be meetings where business is done, not just pontificating on various issues at length, and I think we should stick with what we have. I think it's a good check and balance to make sure that what we're talking about really is related to city business and is necessary.
Councilman Good.
Well, as our attorney just described, we can't vet them. We would have to bring an item forward, a request that we couldn't justify why we wanted to do it. We would just have to make a generalized statement of we need to talk about pesticide use, and we couldn't explain to another councilman why it's important, because should that person then say, no, I don't agree with that, you have to go to someone else and give them the same justification and reasoning. But by doing that, we potentially move towards an open meeting law violation. So I just can't imagine I'm supposed to agree with another council person, but you can't tell me why you want to do it. And if there was a kind of a off-the-wall council member in the past that this was generated to silence, maybe the public needs to hear the kind of wacky proposals coming from such a council person, so the likelihood of their re-election would be drastically diminished.
Councilman Sischke.
Thank you. Well, there are interesting points on both sides of this issue. And John, have we had problems with this in the past, or have we just not paid attention to the open meeting law when all this happens?
I'm certainly unaware of any open meeting law violation in terms of these discussions. It's my impression that, and Councilman Good sort of mentioned one occasion where he had to go and ask a third person, and so I understand the concern, and again, I think it's a tough one because, yeah, you're really not supposed to advocate why you want it on an agenda. You're supposed to say, this is a topic I think the public or we should discuss without advocating. That does make it maybe challenging to convince someone to sign on to it. But I don't think we've had open meeting law type violations in the past on this policy, but I do understand Councilman Good's concern that it could happen in the future. So it is a tough one. I think again, if that's you're still not able to use the clerk to advocate for you. Don't get me wrong, but if you use the clerk, who then shops it around to another council person to get something on an agenda, the clerk can't advocate for you, but it sort of prevents that accidental or unintentional potential violation by saying, the person saying, I'd like this on the agenda. I think it's important to discuss, and then the other person saying, well, why? And all of a sudden, one response may be kind of a meeting if too many people have that discussion. So I get that, but it's really sort of your policy decision. And I think it does come down to what Councilwoman Scholl said, and Councilman Blair said. It's sort of a meeting efficiency preference versus a public interest preference of a council person wanting something on an agenda.
Why don't we let our clerk handle it and just be done with it?
Say that again?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see absolutely anything wrong with that. If I want to put something on the agenda, I go to Maureen and say, can you see if there's another councilwoman that would like to have this on the agenda? And then you either get a yes or a no. Then you don't have a chance of violating the open meeting law.
Yep. Councilwoman Scholl.
I think another point you made is just because let's say someone asks me to put something on the agenda and I say yes, doesn't mean I necessarily have to agree with it. I could just think that maybe it is a topic that's related to an issue in this community and we should talk about it. And John, can you, like, if you were going to send something to Maureen, like, let's use the pesticide example. Like, I want to talk about pesticide use relating to blah, blah, blah. Like, explaining what you want to talk about, not necessarily advocating for a solution, but just explaining and giving it context?
Yes, that's fine. The explanation of what the topic is can go into some level of detail. It's the advocacy that you have to be careful about. I want to talk about, goes on this path. I want to talk about pesticide use in the city, or I want to talk about pesticide use by our Parks and Rec department. I've received some complaints from people who are having breathing problems in the park, period. I think that we use too many pesticides, all of a sudden you have a potential problem. So, the city attorney's office could also kind of help contribute to if we're going to do that in writing, to help writing it in a way that stops at the facts and doesn't advocate. But there is that risk. I think by using the clerk's office as sort of filter, it takes out that immediate person-to-person conversation, because she's probably going to do it by way of an email, say, for instance, rather than face-to-face.
I think that's a good point. And two, I think this council member policy, I think it's important to remember that we are a nonpartisan body, and I think it's really important that we keep partisan issues that aren't necessarily related to city business outside of what we do here at the dais. And I think that this is a way to, like I said, check and balance what we're talking about and to make sure that it is truly related to city business. Because while maybe all of us here would use it in the right way, that's not to say that someone could get elected who would just put any old thing on the agenda. And I think, I think this policy works as is, and I don't necessarily support changing it.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, I really agree with Councilwoman Shull on this. I believe it does have to have the two, not on this council, but the prior council to this. I did have someone bring something to me that they wanted to put on the agenda. It was very political. We could have talked about it for 45 minutes up here, and it wouldn't have done anything for the city because it wasn't even a city issue. So I think we can get off track very easily by that.
Mayor, and I guess I have another suggestion too. I don't think anything in your policy would preclude a council person from going to the city manager, for instance, saying, hey, I think we should have a study session on this topic. Because the city manager and the mayor have the authority to put something essentially on an agenda. And as you can see from this agenda, it's probably 90-something% staff-driven, public works projects and these issues and those issues. So most of our agendas are sort of staff-driven issues. Study session items maybe have a little bit more flexibility. So I don't think there's anything in your policy that says, I think we should have a study session on this topic where a councilperson goes to the manager and says, I'd like to see if you can get this on an agenda in the next month or so.
And John, we do that already.
We
I
sort
know
of
I've
do
talked
that
to Michael
now
about can we do a study session or.
And going back to the mayor's point, we do have this sort of shop, I guess, proclamations and presentations. I think that's for meeting efficiency purposes, because there were times we'd have 6 or 7 proclamations, 2 or 3 presentations, and it's 4 o'clock before you get to the business part of the meeting. And I think there was an interest in not cutting them down necessarily, but streamlining the process so we can actually get to some of the business items a little earlier in the day than
Absolutely.
it's clock now, but early in the day than before. So we've done a pretty good job at sort of streamlining the proclamations and presentations.
We got to streamline our attorneys. We got to
So, Councilman Good.
Well, to me, it just comes back to a fundamental respect for representative democracy. If we campaign where the voters want to support our positions, we want to advocate their positions, and they expect us to do that. To abrogate our responsibility and pass it off to a non-elected administrative person takes away our ability to truly represent their interests. And I think it's just fundamental. We should have a right to bring their issues forward, and if it turns out that occasionally we have an uncomfortable topic, well, that's part of what our democracy is all about. That's how our republic was formed, and we have to tolerate some of those things sometimes in order to have true transparency and true representation of the public at large. And I think removing this requirement is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Councilman Lamerson.
Thank you. While I appreciate all of you in your comments, I again go back to a principle that any one single council member who was duly elected by the public should have the authority to ask for something to be put on the agenda, whether it's through the clerk or whether it's through city management or through city attorney. Every one of the people who were elected serve the constituency in the city of Prescott, and anyone should have the ability to say, I would like this on the city council to be discussed.
Blair.
You can always call the question. It doesn't get used often, but in the case of somebody going off wild, you can always call the question with Robert's Rules of Order and shut it down.
Mm-hmm. Public comment?
Leslie Hoy.
Sorry, it takes me so long to get here these days. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council again. I'd like to support Councilman Lamberson and Councilwoman Good on this. I think that it's really important when people elect somebody to the council that that person can have the ability to represent them. I don't see a downside to having more discussion about an issue. We have a problem in our country today with not enough interest in our bodies, and you can see how many people are here today, and we don't know how many people are watching. Hopefully some people are watching, but I think meeting efficiency is important, but it should not be the overriding goal. We can't allow the desire to be efficient to override the necessity to have people interested in our government taking responsibility as voters. So I think, unfortunately, I have seen over the past 20 years, I've known lots of council members over that time, that sometimes a rule like this has been used to keep somebody that was elected by fewer people than somebody else from bringing an issue forward. I'm not saying at all that that's happening in this council, but I have seen that happen. And that keeps the voters that voted for that person from being represented adequately. So I really hope you'll consider at least trying this. I don't see anybody up there now that's going to bring wacky things forward. And maybe if you did, it would be fun. And liven things up, and we'd get a few more people coming to the meetings. So please vote to try this out. Thanks.
Thank you. Other public comment?
No, Mayor.
All right. I'd entertain a motion. Entertaining.
Let's see where we are.
A motion.
9I. I would recommend that we move to adopt resolution number 2019-1710.
Second.
And Mr. Palladini, what this would do is change it to, this resolution would change it to just one.
Correct. In your packet, there it shows the change from either the mayor or a individual council member may place an item on an agenda for consideration by the discussion by the council, consideration or discussion. The mayor or council member making such request, this is the language, may designate the particular meeting date they wish the item to be discussed or considered, and all reasonable efforts shall be made to accommodate the request. That's kind of current language.
Yep. Okay.
Mayor, I have a question. We've talked about political things and city things. Would this include anything? We've talked about wacky things. We've talked about, is this limited to anything, or is this just whatever that council person seems to be wanting to itch that week?
Well, there's nothing in the rules that expressly state that it has to be city related.
Mhm.
Of course, the city council is only authorized to make decisions that are within its sort of charter and statutory authority, although we do see cities adopting resolutions on international issues. So if you wanted to limit that, limit it to sort of city-related issues or Prescott-related issues, which is fairly vague, you could include that language, but there's nothing in there specifically saying that. So, but we have that rule for presentations, that somebody wants to come and do a presentation, it has to be sort of related, something related to Prescott and not something on international politics, for instance. But there's nothing in these rules that limit it to that.
Okay. We have a motion and second. Please vote.
Fails 4-3.
Okay. Let's move on to item 9J, please.
Approval of city contract with Kimley Horn and Associates for engineering design services for the Wildwood Deerfield Road and Cliff Rose Water Main Replacement Project.
Spend some more money.
Good afternoon again, Mayor and Council. Eric Bay with Public Works. This next item is for design and engineering services for some various water main replacements throughout our service area. And these include up in the Wildwood area, down in Hazley Homestead, and then within Cliff Rose. And we're bundling a few of these smaller projects together to kind of receive the financial benefit of the economy of scale of working with one of our consultants. So the first location is out in Wildwood. We have 3 small branches that are aged 40-plus-year-old, undersized, galvanized water mains. We're going to replace those 3 small runs with 4-inch ductile iron pipe. The second location is in the Hazley Homestead off of Deerfield Road. This is the same story as out in Wildwood. Some 2-inch undersized galvanized pipes. The pipes haven't really been experiencing the leaks and the breaks that we've been seeing in Wildwood, although they are a little bit older and the connection points have been failing. So we're going to tackle those before they become a problem and replace them with the 4-inch ductile iron pipe as well. The third location is Boardwalk and Marvin Gardens, and I don't think that this location is going to be a surprise to anybody on the council because there was an article about this in the newspaper recently. There is approximately 2,000 linear feet of water main that are correctly sized for the area, but were constructed with a water main material that struggles to perform when experiencing common construction techniques and operating conditions.
Can you explain that to us lay people?
Absolutely.
What kind of pipe?
There is currently PVC pipe that is installed throughout the Cliff Rose neighborhood. We've been seeing an increasing number of leaks and breaks on that pipe over the last number of years, and it's been a cause for concern for water operations. At this point, we are to the point where we need to make the investment to replace it with ductile iron pipe so that we have a reliable system within that area.
Do you have any idea? Because Cliff Rose is not that old of a subdivision, so my question to you would be, is because it was not put in the ground properly because of the shading material, what do you suppose is causing the PVC to fail?
So in this particular instance, a lot of the failures that we have seen have been a result of installation deficiencies, shading material being a big one of those.
Councilman Lamberson.
Thank you. Do we not have a inspection policy to where we do adequate inspections, to where we can be insured as somebody who's agreeing to have somebody do something in the city that it meets city specs?
We absolutely do, and we have a very comprehensive detail that outlines the inspection that needs to occur. Were we using materials such as PVC pipe? The as-built for the Cliff Rose subdivision were signed in 1988, and I can't directly speak to the inspection that was assigned.
That answers that question. It was a long, long time ago. The materials were different then. The history of knowing what PVC would do in a rocky environment were different then. Thank you for answering that.
Anything else, Eric? Go ahead.
Yes. So to finish off here, Kimley Horn was the selected design firm, and we selected them off of our FY 19 through 24 on-call professional services contract. We have negotiated a scope and fee with this consultant to perform design in all 3 locations around the city. Funding is available in the water fund, and it's time we get moving on this project.
Okay, questions, comments from the council? Any public comment?
No, Mayor.
Entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move to approve city contract number 2019-246 with Kimley Horn and Associates for engineering design services for the Wildwood, Deerfield Road, and Cliff Rose water main replacement project.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
All right, let's move on to item 9K, please.
Preliminary plat of Bradshaw Hills, a 33-lot subdivision.
Can't read it. Bradshaw, blue. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a proposal for preliminary plat for a small property, relatively small property compared to the ones you're used to looking at, such as the Granite Dells Estates or Deepwell Ranch. This property is actually located just south of downtown, south and east of downtown. It's on top of a hill. You get there up Bradshaw Drive, which takes an S-turn to reach to the top of the hill, and then access to the property from there. One of the interesting things about the proposal for this particular property is that it's zoned business general. It's surrounded by residential properties to the east, west, and south. But this property was originally intended for some type of a resort or hotel development many, many decades ago. The proposal now is for a 33 single-family lot preliminary plat, a subdivision, to be accessed at one location off of Bradshaw Drive, and to provide relatively small lots, which are more or less the current market for development, and to provide single-family homes on those lots for individual sales. The project, a little bit closer look, the project involves a single street, a cul-de-sac that meets our fire turnaround requirements, and then a couple of lots that are accessed off a private easement. One of the things that came out of the discussion at Planning Commission about this were concerns by some of the nearby neighbors of the roadway conditions on Bradshaw Drive to start with, and specifically site distances. There are some issues associated with the design of the original roadway that make certain points a little bit hard to see. As a result of a previous proposal that had a lot of public comment, the developer, the owner of this project, came back with a proposal to shift his roadway over so that his entrance road is at the highest point, giving the best view in all directions for vehicular traffic. This was discussed at the Planning Commission recently. The residents who had concerns about it, I think, have had their concerns addressed by both the developer as well as in discussions with city staff, planning staff, and engineering staff, specifically the traffic engineer. And I believe at this point there are no specific objections remaining to this preliminary plat. Planning Commission reviewed it, they discussed all of these items and made a recommendation of 6-0 in favor of the plat. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you for that, George. Any questions, comments from the council? Councilman Good?
Well, I've been following this project since it was first brought before Planning and Zoning. It's a very difficult piece of property. That Bradshaw Drive S-curve at the bottom of the hill is, quite frankly, pretty darn dangerous. Condition of the roadway in some cases is narrower than considered safe. There's no guardrail at the bottom. When this first came forward, there were 2 entrance exits, and it was modified to eliminate one of those, which was an improvement. But it's still a very steep road, and because of the steepness, all of these homes have to have sprinklers in them.
That's correct.
So just based upon standard safety codes, these are kind of considered risky. You know, I just think it's, and quite frankly, Gary Palmer's in the audience here, and I've got to applaud him for the magnificent work that he did putting together that binder, so that we would have a pretty good understanding of what those risks are to the surrounding residents. And being a strong proponent of evidence-based decision-making, I think he made a pretty strong case for why this particular project is not appropriate at this time. I think that road has to be upgraded in some fashion to make it much safer. I'm just envisioning either people coming down the top of Bradshaw and encountering a slow-moving vehicle exiting that neighborhood, and then having to apply brakes in the snow or the ice in the winter, and causing problems. Or the person who's exiting that neighborhood realizing that they may be encountering someone coming down that hill, and having to accelerate to get out of that neighborhood quickly, also makes it dangerous for them to continue on and navigate that S-curve in a safe manner. I just think there's just too much risk involved. I know that it would be nice if we could rezone this property, but I think under the Proposition 207 concerns, that would be considering a taking by downzoning it to a more appropriate zoning amount. So we're kind of stuck here. And my feeling is, until that road is made substantially more safe, it's inappropriate to approve this many vehicle trips per day exiting this development. I just can't agree with approving it, so I would be a no vote here.
Councilman Blair?
What is the logic of all these units happen to be sprinkled?
Fire access up Bradshaw Drive.
Too steep for the
Specifically,
fire
it's steep. It's steeper than our current road requirements now. In
but
the
wait.
wintertime.
But they designed the cul-de-sac for a fire truck so they don't have to use reverse, so they can turn around.
That's correct.
So now we're still having to sprinkle them?
Yes. Again, if fire sprinkler system would be required,
That's our fire code. This is where we need to throw the book in the trash. You know, we have a fire department to fight fires, but you know, again, to go back and even if it was affordable housing, to have to sprinkle every one of those when it is going to have fire hydrants and it's got to turn around for a fire truck, and to ask the homeowner to do one more thing is just wrong. It's driving me nuts to see this constantly.
Other questions, comments from the council? Public comment?
No, Mayor.
Well, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, come on up. Just give that to the clerk there. Thank you.
Mayor, while he's coming up, one point that should be made is that at preliminary plat, one of the requirements that came out of our traffic engineering was that they have to do an engineering traffic impact analysis. And there is an expectation that they're going to have to do some off-site improvements to Bradshaw Drive.
The developer?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, public comment.
Go ahead.
Gary Palmer, 280 Point of View. This Bradshaw Hills will be developed in my backyard. And I just want to take a moment here, and as you mentioned, this is a year in progress. Many iterations, many changes, and the concerns of the community, there's 30 letters in here of concerns. And I want to just take a moment and thank George Sheets, the chairman of P&Z, and of course George Worley, who unbiasedly just shared this whole project with us, from both sides, pros and cons. I spoke with the developer, and he's been very open, and they've made an adjustments for us. And I think that the concerns that have been shared here, we all know that they're there, and they're not going to go away, and they need to be fixed. And that, I spoke with Ian Mattingly, and he understands. And it really comes down to the civil engineers and the law and what is going to be safe and what's going to be proper and what's going to be right. And, I've been in the film business for 46 years, and I've worked with the studios in making films. And this is my first experience this past year with the government and public and so on and so forth. And so I've got to say how I'm astonished at the thoughtfulness, at the effort, at the concern of everyone involved. I mean, I can open up this book and show you the cards from everybody, from all the council members, from the planning and zoning, from George. They've always been there to answer my questions. They've never, sidestepped me at all. They've just said, what can I do to help? Here's my card, here's my cell number, call me, let me know. Like, this does not happen. But you know what? It's happening here in Prescott. And I got to just say, I'm grateful beyond words for this type of communication. And I just appreciate it so much. And I just want to thank each and every one of you.
Thank you, Gary.
Any questions? Or?
No, thank you. So, George, my understanding is Planning and Zoning Commission obviously went through their process here and approved this 6-0.
That's correct, sir.
And then they asked that the final plat come back to them?
That's correct. Yes, they would like to see it one more time after the traffic impact analysis and with any kind of additional staff input that may happen in between the preliminary and final plat.
Okay. Blair, did you want to? I thought I saw you push the button there.
I was just
okay.
I was nervous.
Councilman Lamerson.
Yeah, as liaison to P&Z, they did their job well. They worked with the private sector. They fully vetted this over and over and over. It wasn't 1 or 2 meetings. It was a long time. And I'm sure that they're going to do exactly what they told you they want to do. They want this to come back. They want to see the traffic engineering. They want to see the recommendations, if any modifications have to be done, et cetera. The important part is anybody who's lived here for any time knows about Bradshaw. We know that certain things have to be done in order to have that road safe, especially adding X amount of units on top of what's already there. So I feel very comfortable with what they've done.
Very good. Councilman Sischka.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry I was out for part of this, George. Jim, I had a question for you. You're the liaison to P&Z. Was there always agreement among the commissioners on this project?
No. No, they worked through the issues, but they worked through the issues with the applicant as well as with city staff, and they addressed these things, and I thought they did a very, very stand-up job. They served this council well.
And what were the issues that they were stuck on?
Ice, snow, traffic count, lights, just various different things that any residential neighborhood would be concerned with.
Sure.
If you were tripling the traffic flow on a residential street.
And what alleviated their concerns mainly?
All of the above that I just said. They work with the various entities, and I appreciate Gary coming forward and saying these people worked with us. They worked with us. They worked with us. They listened to us. And if he wasn't comfortable, he would tell you that.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, I want to thank you, Mr. Palmer, for coming to Pedestrian Bicycle Committee yesterday. And I believe that some of your concerns were addressed by that group as well. And I drove up there yesterday. It's absolutely a beautiful piece of property. You have a nice backyard, by the way. And I know right now there's, of course, we didn't see a lot of traffic at the time. But I think those issues can be worked through. So what will be the results of this study? What's going to come back? Gary, what's the next step?
So most of the time, those studies look at the impact of the additional traffic. They make a determination as to how much additional traffic. There are certain standards you use, but different types of developments can change those standards to determine how many cars per hour, how many cars per day are generated by a development. They also look at site distances, lane widths, whether right turn pockets or left turn pockets have to be created. So all of that will come from this traffic impact analysis. And at the end of it, our engineering staff will make those requirements as part of the final plat submittal to council, to Planning Commission for review. And just for the audience sake, typically final plats don't go back to the Planning Commission, they come straight here. So this is a little bit different request because of the unusual circumstances.
There was a lot of traffic trips up there when we were drinking beer in high school. I don't think it'll be too bad.
I think that's why those big rocks are there, right, Councilman Blair? Well, I appreciate that. And is there opportunity for the city manager asked you this yesterday, is there opportunity for the city to make some improvements?
I'm sure there could be, and if they're beneficial beyond just this development, it's something we can look at.
Well, certainly, there are a lot of houses up there already.
Yeah.
And just rails, guardrails.
We can certainly look at it. Most definitely.
Other questions, comments from the council? I think we heard all the public comment too, right, Maureen?
On a second, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
If in fact there are improvements to be made, would the landowner, the developer, participate?
Yeah, to the extent that the improvements are required by the developer would pay that to the extent. If there are other improvements you want to make that aren't needed because of the development, the city could piggyback on that and add extra things that if they aren't caused by development, essentially. So could look at it as sort of a pairing up or coupling up of the two projects if there's some things the city wants to do beyond what the development directly requires.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move to approve PLN 19-009, a preliminary plat for Bradshaw Hills subdivision.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote.
Passes 6-1.
All right, let's move on to item 9L, please.
Preliminary plat of Westwood, a proposed subdivision within the Deepwell Ranch Master Plan.
Yeah. Thank you again. Westwood is a preliminary plat proposal. It's within the Deepwell Ranch Master Plan area. It is for a much larger subdivision than we just looked at. Location is immediately across the street to the west from the Sandalwood development, was originally approved by council as Antelope Crossings. This area is proposed for 100, and I apologize, this is turned sideways, so to the right is north. 181 lots, single-family development, again, similar lot sizes to the one you just saw. In this case, there are 3 access points along Willow Creek Road, and Willow Creek Road is shown along the bottom of this particular drawing. The proposal, while it's in the master plan area for Deepwell Ranch with its unusual requirements that were adopted as part of that master plan, is a rather standard subdivision. It's pretty mundane as far as subdivision layouts go. It's a little different than the Sandalwood development across the street in that it's going to take advantage of the terrain and not be graded flat. It'll have elevation changes. Roadway deviations are more curved than the grid pattern that you see on the other side of the street. This proposal, too, went before our Planning Commission recently. They took a look at all of the aspects of the development, including the master plan requirements that included land use groups, picking a land use group as required by the master plan, and the requirements of those land use groups, which is similar to our zoning requirements in that they include setbacks and minimum lot sizes, et cetera. At the end of the discussion and with no public comment, Planning Commission also voted 6-0 in favor of this proposed preliminary plat. In this case, they did not specifically request the plat come back to them for final plat review. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, George. Councilman Blair.
Are they meeting the 25% requirement for open space?
Yes. This particular subdivision by itself doesn't, but the development on that side of the street will, and that was a requirement of the master plan.
You mentioned Antelope Point. Are they still calling it Antelope Point, or did they change it to Saddlewood?
I believe it's changed to Saddlewood for marketing purposes, but the plat was originally Antelope Crossing.
So this is right directly across the street.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Last question then. Does that third access point I couldn't tell to the north, does that involve the roundabout corner?
No, sir. It's still well south of the roundabout.
Okay.
That doesn't really show it that well. The roundabout is around the curve to the north and back over to 89. So this is quite a ways off from that.
All righty. Thank you.
Councilman Good.
You know, I'm just kind of concerned about how this deep well phases are being developed. You know, I went back and of course I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission when we vetted this whole deep well development, and I looked at the two big spiral bound presentation books that we had, and I counted over 600 images in those two books. One of the 600 actually showed a 6-foot wall. Everything else showed this open, kind of traditional looking development that we see in most of our neighborhoods here in Prescott. And Saddlewood now has a 6-foot wall that goes up Willow Creek Road. Now this one on the opposite side is going to have a wall in their part of it. And I'm starting to see the neighborhoods in Palm Springs, Palm Desert, Scottsdale, where these are walled neighborhoods. And it's a dramatically different type of design than what was proposed from the developers. And I don't think that that's in the character of Prescott and the Prescott developments that we've seen. In my community in Southview, we don't even allow walls between properties to keep it more open and natural and rural in its construction. And this is going really in the opposite direction. Now, you know, I'm not here to redesign their development. You know, they have the right to do this, and but I just find it kind of disingenuous to show these vast amount of open images, and then when they start building it, it's all walled. So I'm not going to vote no on this, but I just think it's something to be concerned about because it's turning out to be quite a bit different than how it was originally presented. Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I've visited the Saddleback out there and looked at those models that they have, and they're really nice starter point homes. I mean, we have a very hard time in the city of Prescott with affordable homes. Do you know, have they talked at all about price point on these?
We did not discuss it specifically. These are larger lots, and with the unusual, or with the more curved streets and wider spaces, I would anticipate this to be significantly higher price point. We do have representatives here who might be able to answer those questions for you if you would like.
Sure, I'd kind of like to know that.
Mayor, Council, John Carlson, Spiritu Loci, 4645 North 32nd Street. So this is, what we're proposing is the pre-plat, and we're reviewing it for compliance with the master plan. The master plan proposed all the images, the character of the streets, the open space corridors. Within this, there are master plan elements, like the open space corridor running through the middle of the property. And so we're continuing to hold that through. We have the open space and the path and trail along Willow Creek Road that we're also holding and opening through as it continues up. And so as we phase this through, as we approved the master plan, we laid out the structure and the framework for all of that, and now we're taking where we're at in the land and applying those master plan elements throughout.
Okay. And price point?
Price point, we think we're going to be, it's going to be definitely a move up from across the way.
Okay.
And couldn't tell you the exact price point, but maybe 400,000
All right.
price point.
Okay. Thank you very much, John.
I have one question. How big are the lots?
They're 58 by 120.
Which translates into...
So there'll be 2-car garage, 3-car garage with a forward-facing, front door, larger backyards, 30 to 40-foot backyards. And then they open up to views towards the state land to the west. They open up to the views to the open space down the middle. And then we have smaller pockets that also open up into little open space courtyards. Along Willow Creek Road, the homes are actually set back further than what they are across the way on Saddlewood. And so where it says Phase 2, for example, on the left side of the screen, those are about 50 to 60 feet from the roadway, from back of curb. And so there'll be an open space channel from there. And then to open up coming down the cul-de-sacs that are coming towards the street. In order to get to that higher price point, we're trying to create something that's a little bit more special to get there. We also looked at arrivals and sequence as we're going into the neighborhood. And so as you can see, every time we're entering into the neighborhood off of Willow Creek Road, we're arriving to a destination point, a park, a postcard setting. And so something that's a little bit more lush in character with the landscape, wanting to hold the desert character, the high grass character that we have in Prescott, but wanting to do a little bit more emphasis of color in those, concentrated locations.
Councilman Good?
Yeah, can you address my concerns about these walled neighborhoods? You weren't part of the group. I think Trevor Barger was the one that was presenting for Spiritu Loci to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And like I said, we didn't see any of these walled images. Is that the intention as you go forward with these additional phases to wall all these in, and people will just, when they're traveling through Deep Well, will just see wall after wall after wall?
They'll be reviewed subdivision by subdivision as we go forward. This one I think opens up rather well, so it's quite a contrast to what's across the street. But it will depend on really what the product is. And so we look at a lot of the images that are in the book. We're looking at the character of the architecture, the character of the landscape, and not necessarily specifically walls or backyard walls or common yard walls in those detailed pictures.
So the answer is yes?
Mm-hmm. We could, yep.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions, comments from the council? Okay, public comment?
No, Mayor.
Okay. Well, I entertain a motion then.
Mayor, I move to approve PLN 19-006, the preliminary plat for Westwood, 181 lot residential subdivision.
Second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 6-1.
Excuse me.
Passes 7-0.
All right. Thank you, George. Let's go to item 9Z. No, M.
That's how it feels.
Adoption of the 2018 International Building and Technical Codes, and I will be doing each ordinance and resolution separately after Bryn's presentation.
Fun.
You actually, just Maureen, you only need to read the ordinance caption, not the resolution. So
But
your
they
work
still
is,
have to, don't they still have to vote on the resolution?
yes, they have to vote separately.
But I don't have to read it?
Yes, so I cut your work in half.
Okay.
You're a hero.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Bryn Stotler, Director of Community Development. I am here this evening to continue the conversation on the 2018 ICC Building and Technical Code adoption. This item was introduced to you 2 weeks ago at the May 28th study session, and we reviewed some of our approach and some of the administrative code details at that time. For the benefit of the audience, I know that you've heard some of this, but I've tightened up the history, but just to go back a little ways, as I mentioned on the 28th, the first code adoption in the city of Prescott actually took place in 1875. That was well before we became a state. 144 years later, we continue to utilize the collectively reviewed codes proposed by ICC as a common baseline across jurisdictions, counties, states, and the nation, and including actually globally, as a baseline for safety standards in building, technology, and development. Our particular code adoption is taking place under kind of a unique situation. It was proposed last fall by the Yavapai County Contractors Association that the jurisdictions get together and collaborate on potentially doing this 2018 code adoption together. We initiated a series of meetings and were able to get a core team of the building officials together who met independent of those organizational meetings and really drilled down on the details and the line-by-line analysis of the code. But what I'm happy to report today is that Prescott kicked off the multi-jurisdictional, what we called road shows, in order to include the public at a time when people are not necessarily all at work. We did lunch meetings, some evening meetings, and every jurisdiction held road shows, one or more road shows. We completed ours on February 11th. We were very well attended by about 60 to 70 mostly contractors. So our industry representatives were there, as well as YCCA, and other jurisdictions were there from this group to show their support. So the multi-jurisdictional approach is between the city of Prescott, the town of Chino Valley, Yavapai County, and the town of Prescott Valley. And of course, to again acknowledge not only the providing the impetus for this code adoption, but great support from our local County Contractors Association, who does a tremendous job of advocating for their industry. Just a little recap again. The Arizona Building Officials Group conducted many regional workshops to break down changes between the last code iteration, which was 2015, to this code adoption. Participating CBOs, in our case, in this region, met monthly to drill down on the detail level. Review and alignment of inspection methodologies were a topic of conversation to better manage contractor expectations and local practices. And then we really polled the contractor groups to ascertain their most common contractor complaints in order to align interpretations across these jurisdictions to come up with really a more contractor-friendly environment across all the jurisdictions and everybody operating from the same sheet of music. Just a little bit of a recap of how we presented the information on the code to the public. Our City of Prescott website had a designated page where we housed the draft versions of the National Electric Code. The administrative code, which I've stated previously, is basically a customization of the building codes to our area and our region. International Building Code, International IECC, the Energy Conservation Code, International Fuel Gas Code, Mechanical Code, Plumbing Code, and Residential Building Code. The codes that are up there are not just drafts thrown up so that folks can review line by line. What they really represent is a minimum of about 295 hours of staff time spent across the entire building division team. Each staff person in the building division took a section of code, reviewed it line by line, made proposals about how to either customize those regulations or reduce those regulations so that they made the most sense for our local contractors. We also encourage people to conduct online research of the codes at iccsafe.org, which is the website for the International Code Council. And I also wanted to just note that the Prescott Public Library, when they found out that we were entertaining this code adoption, immediately contacted me to find out what version they should be purchasing so that the residents of our community have access to read the code books. And that's an investment. It's about $2,000 worth of code books, and obviously our community has taken that seriously enough to always make that available to constituents. I talked about the road shows already, but I wanted to just point out that we continue our industry outreach with quarterly contractor meetings. Our next one is scheduled for July 10th, and should the council choose to adopt the codes, we will be reviewing in detail with the contractors that attend that meeting the direct effects of implementation. Benefits of these 2018 codes. The last iteration of the code in 2015 included highly technical building technology and language. And so the 18 codes really made an attempt to refine the language, make it more simple, make it user-friendly by industry professionals. Another benefit, of course, is that our ISO rating for our community remains stable, which is a benefit for all city homeowners and business owners. And also, the codes incorporate yet simplify the latest practices in building technology today. I did mention at the last meeting that our Advisory and Appeals Board took a large role in this process. We had 3 meetings that were multiple hours, and every board member of the Advisory and Appeals Board was encouraged to participate. There were a couple of particular items of interest that a couple of our board members brought forward, and we had a lot of dialogue about those items. And eventually the consensus vote was taken on March 27th, where there was a vote for a recommendation to bring these codes to council for the potential adoption. Of course, we're meeting today, and the codes will be adopted at the pleasure of the council, so should you choose to move to approve these code ordinances and resolutions, we would do that here today, and I do apologize in advance for the number of them. There's 110 pages of ordinances and resolutions that are attached to this code adoption, and those ordinances and resolutions, again, are reflective of the amount of staff time and review that has taken place to get to this point. We have accommodated a transition period for plan submittals so that we identified the summer months of this year as a crossover period where contractors who have been designing and building to the 2012 code, which is our currently adopted code, can continue to submit, and the 18 code, should it be adopted, can also be submitted. So there's an overlap period so that nobody has to actually go back and redraw plans that were originally drawn in the 2012 codes. We've also looked at a number of process adjustments as a part of this examination, and we were really pleased to be able to launch a virtual inspection program in May of this year. We're excited to offer that service for contractors who, HVAC is a good example. An HVAC contractor goes out to do a job, they're replacing a unit, it's a one-day job. Our current inspection program would have them call in an inspection when the work was completed, and then they would have to staff somebody to be there the next day to receive the inspection. So the Skype inspection gives us an opportunity to, in real time, address those types of inspections on a same-day basis. It's a great convenience to the contractors that do those one-day jobs. We have looked at a number of our permit applications in anticipation of not only the adoption of these codes, but also in anticipation of our new permitting software system, which we're very excited about. And we are streamlining those process flows so that we can easily implement the code adoption and also easily implement the revised and shortened permit applications in our new software. We've established also a project manager in residence program for owner builder builds, which sometimes need a little extra hand holding, and I think it's a great way of assigning a customer service standout on our team to work with an owner builder so that they have somebody designated on the team that kind of walks them through the process. And also for complex commercial projects, which tend to have longer timelines and more complexity. I intentionally shortened the presentation a little bit today, but if you have any questions regarding the last presentation, the detail level of the administrative code, or other highlights, we're happy to respond to those at this time.
Thank you, Bren. Councilman Blair?
Thank you. As you know, I'm not a fan of too many codes or rules and regulations. I'm a fan of common sense. I want to know, within this code, how much does this open up to personal interpretation by the building officials?
I think there's always an opportunity for the building official to determine the level of flexibility within a given part of the code. It does fluctuate a little bit from part to part. And maybe I'll just have Paul come up and talk a little bit in greater detail about that if you'd like.
Yeah, let me give you the second part of the question. What I find interesting, and I want to thank Sandy and her group and everybody that worked on this thing, but as I always find with any kind of thing you put together, there's always flaws, or a little fly in the ointment. How flexible are we going to be as a region or a group to see something that's in this code that isn't necessarily working or is absolutely pathetic after we had it for a while? Are we going to change those things, or are we just going to live with them? Most of the time, we just live with them, and we aggravate the building community by living with them. So I kind of look at these codes like my pairs of shoes. When my wife tells me I tell my wife I need a new pair of shoes, and she says, get rid of 2 pairs before you buy another one. I look at the same way with codes. There's a lot of stuff in those code books that become draconian, and they're not worth what they're meant to be. And I look at the codes of the years ago and how things were built, and they're all still standing. We don't have all these codes and rules and regulations, and I think they're onerous in my own mind, but maybe you guys can talk me out of that someday. But I just hope we're flexible enough to our building community that these new codes don't hamstring our building communities. And Paul, if you can explain that to me, the flexibility, their interpretation of the code from one inspector to another.
Okay, is this still on? One thing that we have, Mayor and Council and Councilman Blair, one thing that we've tried to incorporate is something that would give to the contractors a working element. And I know I used this last time, but a common means of creating a project for the end user. Contractors are by all rights responsible to the communities, but they're also responsible to the ROC. ROC deals a lot with the quality and what you get out of the product. What we deal with a lot is the safety, life safety issues. The code is determined that certain things are a necessity to maintain an element that allows people not to have a house standing, but house standing long enough for them to exit and seek help, seek shelter, or basically prevent falling down around their ears. With this code adoption and with the code adoptions prior, it's always been looked at, we gotta go with the higher standard. We gotta go with more code is better code. Well, that's not true. More code is not always the better code. What it needs to be is quality code. I think 2018 has actually stepped back from that, and some of the things that's come out in the code, even the ICC realizes that those codes do not always necessarily present a better thing. One thing that you probably heard and some things have been talking about is some of the things in the electrical code that were instilled on it and forced onto the contractors as a whole. We determined as building officials in interpretation that these certain items were not necessarily in the best interest of this certain community. It didn't give us a level of safety that we're looking at by just providing a restrictor standard. The same thing with some of the mechanical elements, where we have adopted certain things in the mechanical code and in the energy code that the other jurisdictions haven't adopted, they chose not to adopt a greater standard and meet our standard. However, we did not stricken our standard by making it a tighter, more compliant type standard. We said we have a good standard. We don't need to increase it under the 2018 ICC. We just need to look at some of the things that we were required to by taking certain grant money that we need to maintain in order to make sure our ISO rating is the same. And to answer your questions, are we just basically going to leave it going? Absolutely not. The code is always, to me, a fluid motion in development thing. If we find something in the code that's not working for us, we find something in the code that really doesn't need to be required because the industry as a whole has developed a standard in which to protect and which to serve that, then we as a community of CBOs with this particular adoption have said, we will talk with each other. We will bring forth things that we don't like. And one thing that was brought forward was the manufactured housing industry. The requirements for those are pretty strict. The requirements for those are based on the HUD. They are to HUD standard. Prescott Valley eliminated the requirements and some of the things saying, listen, HUD has a standard, the manufactured housing industry has a standard. Why are we trying to increase it just because the ICC likes the idea? So that's one thing we're looking at. We can't always do everything through code adoption, but we definitely can do things through our policies in which we look at things. The staff is always coming to me on a daily basis. I encourage them. If you find something that's not working or means to make this better, by all means, bring it forth. I don't want this code to just sit there and say, here's the code, do it by what the code says, leave me alone. That's not what my job is, and that's not why I figured you brought me on board for this. My job is to make sure this code acts favorably for everybody concerned. We can't make it all right for everybody, but the majority have the ability to bring safety, construction practices that do not increase heavily onto the industry, but still are able to give these people the quality home in which they're buying and which they expect to buy.
I appreciate those comments. I just like there to be that flexibility, and I think when the industry has something that takes place and is UL certified, or you have an engineer certified, or you have another stamp on it besides the city of Prescott, and then we're trying to recreate that wheel, it's the wrong thing to do because it's already been inspected once or maybe even twice. And I hate to see the city of Prescott or code be so restrictive that we have to have all these different inspections where the product's already been inspected. I just hate to see that duplication and waste of time in the industry.
And I agree absolutely. One thing that we do have is we have a lot more third-party inspections. That means if a person is qualified to install, if they have the certification to inspect, they'll be able to inspect the product. We do that with what would be Tyvek or King Wrap and things like that. Now we're incorporating that more and more into the different other areas. First thing is mechanical, getting that up and running, because we have to do the blower door test because it's a requirement standard based upon the ICCs and the energy code that we have to have as part of it, because we have accepted grant money that says we will abide by that particular code at the time, which is the 2012. But we looked at it, and talking with staff and everything, we have decided that a third-party certification does not in any way violate that ability to perform that. It still gives a test on the system for the end user, but it also gives an ability of somebody who's been certified in that kind of testing to do the testing. And we actually have more people now in the area than we had before. A year ago, you might only have one. Now we have actually 3 to 4 of them that actually do this certification. And there's more of them that want to get their own certification so that they can protect their secrets of the trade and allow them to do their testing and meet the code requirements and give us certifications that show to the people, I do have a code compliant product.
Councilman Good.
Well, Paul, I'm glad to hear that there will be some flexibility in this and unintended consequences, which always come out, especially when somebody shows up. I'm from the federal government. I'm here to help you. kind of fits into that category. So, you know, I've heard some concerns from contractors about the blower door test and the third-party verifications and inspection and how much that's going to cost in new home construction, whether the homes are so energy efficient and so tight that they're almost difficult to live in. I was talking to one contractor. He said, well, I might have to add a fresh air injection component to this. And I said, isn't that called a window? You know, but no, it's got to be, you know, some kind of a federal government standard. So as long as there's some flexibility here when we identify problems in this area and we can correct them, then I think that's something we can live with. Thanks.
Yeah, I think you're going to hear consensus from this council it's going to align with these guys and what they're saying about just being reasonable. And I appreciate your comments, Paul, and we'll hold you to that we've got to be flexible moving forward with this. And,
Mayor,
you know,
can I ask a question? I know it's late in the day. Paul, explain this grant that we accepted and how much money it was and why it sort of put us in an interesting position.
He'll grab some documents, but and neither of us were here, frankly, when that happened. But apparently, there were some ARA funds from the federal government during the time when that program was active that were either solicited or received by the city. I'm not sure what the specific details were. And by agreeing to receipt of those funds, the city also agreed to maintain a certain interval of code adoption as to the Energy Conservation Code.
You know how much money it was, Bryn? I know you weren't here, but
I think that I recall Sandy Griffith saying it was about $260,000. $168,000.
is it the kind of thing if we decided that this was bad policy, you could give it back at this point?
I believe that that's already been explored, and actually Sandy was here more through that process and might be better able to speak to it.
Because for $160K, if this is a burden that's maybe too high, I'm not all about giving money back, but at some level it's a small price to pay if you could. I mean, if we think it's not the right thing to do for the community.
I'm just curious why, I don't know, maybe I was asleep when the council approved that, but why would we approve something that federal funds when it comes to our building community if we already have enough regulations on our own? Why would we take something that you know is going to have strings tied to it?
I can't address exactly, what was in the mind of the council stuff that was going on, but I understand that a lot of these funds and stuff were coming down at a time where energy was the thing. Everybody was looking at energy and adoption of energy. One thing that also came out of this was that the ISO put a big push on the fact that if you had not adopted one of the international energy codes, if you had not adopted it, then you would actually be added points to your rating, thus increasing your rating. So it's like I believe that in some of the other jurisdictions I was at when those were offered, but they weren't accepted, was still, it's like if we're going to adopt these, why not adopt them and get some funds out of it? I believe that was the thing.
Can we unadopt?
Yeah, I'm here to exactly.
So that was the 2012 code, though, wasn't it, that this was involved with?
We still have that's what we're proposing to continue with is the 2012, because that's the oldest version of the energy code that we can stay with without imposing additional requirements on our home building community.
Okay.
Because the later versions of that code actually do that. So we are basically staying with the minimum requirement under the city's agreement when they accepted the grant funding, and it keeps us compliant and does not put our ISO rating in jeopardy. If the ISO rating went up, the penalties imposed by higher homeowners policies costs would be imposed across every person in Prescott, not just new builds. Every homeowner in Prescott would pay a higher homeowner's insurance price if our rating increased due to noncompliance.
Okay.
And talking with one of the people that were on that that board and committee and everything that made the suggestions and all that, it was actually discussed that to give back the money, and as I understand, because the grant money didn't actually come from the federal government, it was transferred and released to us through the state, that they would not take it back. So it was one of those items that, we're sorry, you got the money, abide by the rules.
What if I threw in interest? Could I take it?
There you go. And like I said, I'm not sure. It's one of those. I think it's damned if we do, damned if we didn't. What we are trying to do with the energy code now is not make it any stricter than what we have. The other communities are actually at the same level of insulation and stuff. It's some of the other things that they chose not to adopt. But it's not everybody. It's, Prescott Valley's not. They're staying on 2006, and the county's staying on 2006. Chino was working towards it for the adoption in 2012.
They didn't take the cheese, huh?
Yeah.
Is there any public comment here, Maureen?
No, Mayor.
Sorry, Mayor, I didn't mean to digress.
I think we're good here for a motion. And do you have to read something here first?
Yes,
Okay.
I have to read all the ordinances. So are you ready? Okay. Number 1, adopt ordinance number 2019-1663, amending Title 3, Chapter 17 of the City Code of the City of Prescott by repealing Sections 3-17-1 and 3-17-2 in their entirety and adopting new Sections 3-17-1 and 3-17-2, adopting that certain document entitled Administrative Building Code, which document was made a public record by resolution number 2019-1695, providing a severance clause and providing penalties therein.
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 2019-1663.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Mayor, you don't have to read the resolution?
No.
Mayor, I move to adopt resolution number 2019-1695.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0. Item 2, adopt ordinance number 2019-1664, amending Title 3, Chapter 1 of the City Code of the City of Prescott entitled International Building Code by repealing Sections 3-1-1 and 3-1-2 and adopting new Sections 3-1-1 and 3-1-2, adopting that certain document entitled International Building Code, which was made a public record by resolution number 2019-1696, providing a severance clause and providing penalties therein.
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 2019-1664.
Second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Mayor, I move to adopt resolution number 2019-1696.
Second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0. Item 3, adopt ordinance number 2019-1665, amending Title 3, Chapter 8 of the City Code of the City of Prescott entitled International Residence Code for 1 and 2 family dwellings by repealing Sections 3-8-1 and 3-8-2 and adopting new Sections 3-8-1 and 3-8-2 by adopting that certain document entitled International Residential Code for 1 and 2 family dwellings, which was made a public record by resolution number 2019-1697, providing a severance clause and providing penalties therein.
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 2019-1665.
Second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Mayor, I move to adopt resolution number 2019-1697.
Second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0. Item 4, adopt ordinance number 2019-1666, amending Title 3, Chapter 5 of the City Code of the City of Prescott entitled International Fuel Gas Code by repealing Sections 3-5-1 and 3-5-2 and adopting new Sections 3-5-1 and 3-5-2 by adopting that certain document entitled International Fuel Gas Code, which document was made a public record by resolution number 2019-1698, providing a severance clause and providing penalties therein.
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 2019-1666.
Second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Mayor, I move to adopt resolution number 2019-1698.
Second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
Passes 7-0. Item number 5, adopt ordinance number 2019-1667, amending Title 3, Chapter 2 of the City Code of the City of Prescott entitled International Mechanical Code by repealing Sections 3-2-1 and 3-2-2 and adopting new Sections 3-2-1 and 3-2-2 by adopting by reference that certain document entitled International Mechanical Code, which was made a public record by Resolution 2019-1699, providing a severance clause and providing penalties therein.
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 2019-1667.
Second.
Please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Mayor, I move to adopt resolution number 2019-1699.
Second.
Motion second, please vote.
Passes 7-0. Item number 6, adopt ordinance number 2019-1668, amending Title 3, Chapter 6 of the City Code of the City of Prescott entitled International Plumbing Code by repealing Sections 3-6-1 and 3-6-2 and adopting new Sections 3-6-1 and 3-6-2 by adopting that certain document entitled International Plumbing Code, which document was made a public record by resolution number 2019-1700, providing a severance clause and providing penalties therein.
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 2019-1668.
Second.
Motion second, please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Mayor, I move to adopt resolution number 2019-1700.
Second.
Motion second, please vote.
Passes 7-0. Item 7, adopt ordinance number 2019-1669, amending Title 3, Chapter 18 of the City Code of the City of Prescott by repealing Sections 3-18-1 and 3-18-2 and adopting new Sections 3-18-1 and 3-18-2 by adopting that certain document titled International Energy Conservation Code with 2018 revisions, which document was made a public record by resolution number 2019-1701, providing a severance clause and providing penalties therein. And also there is a mistake. It should read on the ordinance 1669 and not 1666.
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 2019-1669.
Second.
Motion and second, please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Mayor, I move to adopt resolution number 2019-1701.
Second.
Motion and second, please vote.
Passes 7-0. Item 8, adopt ordinance number 2019-1670, amending Title 3, Chapter 7 of the City Code of the City of Prescott entitled National Electrical Code by repealing Sections 3-7-1 and 3-7-2 and adopting new Sections 3-7-1 and 3-7-2, adopting the certain document entitled National Electrical Code, which was made a public record by resolution number 2019-1702, providing a severance clause and providing penalties therein.
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 2019-1670.
Second.
Motion and second, please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Mayor, I move to adopt resolution number 2019-1702.
Second.
Have a motion and second, please vote.
Passes 7-0. Item 9, adopt ordinance number 2019-1671, repealing Title 3, Chapter 3, Uniform Housing Code of the City Code of the City of Prescott in its entirety.
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 2019-1671.
Second.
Motion and second, please vote.
Passes 7-0.
It's the last one. I move to adopt ordinance number 2019-1672.
Second, thank goodness.
Yeah, I do have to read the whole thing, sorry. Item 10, adopt ordinance number 2019-1672, repealing Title 3, Chapter 15, Uniform Code for Building Conservation of the City Code of the City of Prescott in its entirety.
I move to adopt ordinance number 2019-1672.
Second. Oh, heavens.
We have a first and a second, please vote.
Passes 7-0.
Well done. Is there anything else we can think of to do to keep Maureen from going on vacation? I have a quote.
Oh, that was quite enough, wasn't it?
Yes. Thank you so much, Bryn, Paul. Sandy, thank you for your work on this as well. I have a quote from a fellow Kansan. He was the Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces in World War II, and he was the President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower. This world of ours must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate and be instead a proud confederation of mutual trust and respect. This meeting is adjourned.
Amen.
Oh, hallelujah. Ay, ay, ay.
I'll be in more.